Tonight, you're going to experience the most peaceful sleep of your life. If your mind won't stop racing, if stress feels impossible to escape, or if you're desperately craving deep rest, then what happens in the next 3 hours will change everything. I'm about to share 5 ancient Zen stories that can stop your mental suffering instantly. Not meditation techniques you'll forget tomorrow. Not breathing exercises that don't work. Real stories about ordinary people who discovered how to transform their deepest pain into unshakable peace. Welcome to Moonlight Temple, where healing happens with your very next breath. You've tried everything, haven't you? Apps, counting sheep, meditation videos, but that radio in your head just keeps playing the same worried songs. Tonight is different. If it feels right, share where you're listening from in the comments. Are you in bed in New York, working late in London, or finding quiet in Tokyo? There's something magical knowing we're all here together, finding peace across this world. Right now, get comfortable. Grab that blanket, dim the lights, let your body sink in. You don't need to know Buddhism. You don't need perfect posture. Just listen. Every word has been chosen to help your nervous system finally relax. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within." Tonight, you'll discover exactly what he meant through a story about a restless traveler who found peace in the stillness of a single pond. Let your breathing slow. Your healing begins now. There once lived a merchant named Kenzo who could never sit still. His mind raced faster than the horses that pulled his cart along the mountain roads, always calculating profits, worrying about delays, planning 3 villages ahead, while his feet walked through the present one. Every morning before dawn, he would load his cart with silk and spices, his thoughts already tumbling toward evening, toward tomorrow, toward next season's harvest, toward problems that might never come, but felt absolutely real in the darkness of his restless mind. Kenzo had built a successful business through sheer force of will and constant vigilance. He knew every merchant in 5 provinces, could calculate exchange rates in his sleep, and had never missed a delivery deadline in 15 years of trading. But success had come at a price that he was only beginning to understand. His stomach burned with constant worry, his hands trembled from too much strong tea drunk too quickly while rushing between appointments, and his sleep had become a restless ocean of half-dreams filled with numbers and deadlines and the faces of disappointed customers. In the marketplace, other merchants spoke in whispers about a hidden temple deep in the mountains, where monks claimed to have found something called peace. They said these monks could sit for hours without moving, could sleep deeply without worry, could face any challenge with a calm that seemed almost supernatural. Kenzo scoffed at such stories. Peace was a luxury for people who didn't have real responsibilities, who didn't understand that life was a constant battle against time and circumstances, and the 1,000 ways that everything could go wrong. But as the months passed and his anxiety deepened, as his heart began racing at the slightest provocation, and his mind felt like a wild horse that no rider could tame, Kenzo began to wonder if perhaps these monks knew something he had forgotten, something important that all his success and efficiency had somehow cost him. The idea haunted him during his long journeys, whispered to him in the quiet moments between villages, when the only sound was the rhythmic creaking of his cart wheels and the soft breathing of his tired horse. One autumn morning, when the stress had become so overwhelming that even eating had become difficult, when his reflection in the merchant's mirrors showed a man he barely recognized, gaunt and hollow-eyed, despite his prosperity, Kenzo made a decision that surprised even himself. He would take a detour through the mountain pass, where the temple was said to be hidden. Not to visit, he told himself firmly, just to prove to himself that such a place didn't really exist, that peace was indeed a fairy tale told by people who had never faced real challenges. The path wound higher than he expected, past groves of golden maples that rustled with the whispered secrets of autumn, past streams that sang ancient songs over stones polished smooth by countless years of patient water. But Kenzo barely noticed the beauty that surrounded him like a gentle embrace. His mind was still racing through its familiar patterns, calculating how much time this detour was costing him, wondering if the merchant in the next village would still be waiting if he arrived after sunset, rehearsing apologies for delays and explanations for choices that suddenly seemed foolish and impractical. The familiar radio of worry played its endless loop in his head, the same songs of anxiety he had been listening to for so many years that he had almost forgotten there might be other kinds of music in the world. His thoughts chased each other in tight circles, like dogs chasing their own tails, creating noise and motion, but never actually arriving anywhere useful or peaceful. This was the soundtrack of his life, this constant mental chatter that felt as natural and inevitable as breathing, though infinitely less nourishing. After 3 hours of climbing, just as Kenzo was about to turn back and declare this entire expedition a waste of valuable time, the trees opened into a small clearing that took his breath away. In the center sat a perfectly still pond, so clear and motionless that it looked like a mirror dropped from heaven by careless angels. The water was so transparent that Kenzo could see every pebble on the bottom, every fallen leaf that had settled there like a message from the world above, every tiny fish that moved like liquid silver through the depths, their movements creating barely perceptible ripples that immediately smoothed themselves away. And sitting beside this pond, as still as the water itself, was an old monk whose presence seemed to radiate the same quality of deep calm that emanated from the water. He wasn't chanting or praying or performing any kind of ritual that Kenzo could identify. He was simply sitting, watching the pond with the gentle attention of someone reading a beloved poem for the 1,000th time, finding new meaning in familiar words, discovering fresh wonder in what others might consider ordinary. His face held the kind of peace that Kenzo had seen only in sleeping children before the world taught them to worry about tomorrow. Even Kenzo's restless horse seemed affected by the atmosphere of this place. She stopped her usual fidgeting and nervous head tossing, lowered her graceful neck to graze quietly, and breathed out a long, soft sigh that sounded almost like relief. It was as if the very air here contained some quality that allowed both human and animal nervous systems to remember what relaxation felt like, to recall a state of being that existed before stress and urgency became the dominant forces in their lives. Kenzo dismounted slowly, telling himself he would just ask for directions to wherever he was supposed to be going, and then leave immediately to make up for lost time. But something about the monk's absolute stillness made him hesitate, made him question the urgent voice in his head that was already listing all the reasons why he needed to hurry away from this place. There was a quality to the silence here that felt different from mere absence of sound, a fullness rather than an emptiness, as if the quiet itself was alive and welcoming. "Excuse me, Venerable Sir," he called out, his voice somehow seeming too loud and harsh in this sanctuary of gentleness, like a shout in a library or laughter at a funeral. "I'm looking for the temple that's supposed to be somewhere in these mountains." The monk turned slowly, with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned that every movement could be a meditation, every gesture an expression of inner peace. When his eyes met Kenzo's, the merchant felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the gift of complete, undivided attention. The monk wasn't looking past him to something more important, wasn't mentally preparing his next words while Kenzo spoke, wasn't cataloguing the stranger's appearance or making judgments about his obvious wealth and merchant's clothing. He was simply present, fully there, as if this moment contained everything that mattered in the world, as if nothing existed beyond this clearing, this pond, this conversation. "You have found it," the monk said gently, his voice carrying the same quality of stillness that characterized his posture. "This pond is our temple, our teacher, our daily instruction in the art of peace. Every morning, we come here not to worship or to pray in the conventional sense, but to learn what water knows about the nature of calm, about the possibility of clarity even in a world that constantly tries to disturb our surface." "Learn what?" Kenzo asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice, though something in the monk's presence made his doubt feel less aggressive than usual, more like genuine curiosity than defensive disbelief. "What can you possibly learn from staring at water? How does sitting beside a pond help with real problems, real responsibilities, real life?" The monk smiled, and his smile was as calm and clear as the pond's surface, reflecting understanding without judgment, warmth without urgency. "Watch," he said simply, and there was something in that single word that made Kenzo's mental chatter quiet just slightly, as if his mind sensed that something important was about to be revealed. And then the monk reached down and picked up a small stone, smooth and dark, and tossed it gently into the center of the pond. Immediately, ripples began to spread outward in perfect circles, disturbing the mirror-like surface that had been so beautifully still just moments before. The reflection of the sky shattered into moving fragments of blue and white and grey. The clear view to the bottom became wavy and distorted, like looking through a window during a rainstorm. The tiny fish darted away in alarm, their peaceful movements replaced by quick, nervous energy. For a moment, the peaceful pond became a chaos of movement and confusion, all its serenity apparently destroyed by one small stone. But then, as Kenzo watched with growing fascination, something remarkable happened. Gradually, so gradually that he almost missed the beginning of the process, the ripples began to fade. The circles grew wider and gentler as they moved toward the edges of the pond, losing their urgency and intensity with each expanding ring. They reached the shoreline and disappeared completely, as if the earth itself had absorbed their energy and transformed it into something else, something peaceful. And slowly, beautifully, with a grace that seemed almost magical, the water returned to its original stillness. The sky appeared again in perfect reflection, as clear and true as before. The bottom became visible once more, every pebble and leaf exactly where it had been, unchanged by the temporary disturbance. The little fish resumed their gentle swimming, their panic forgotten as if it had never happened. The pond had healed itself simply by doing nothing at all, simply by allowing its natural state to reassert itself without effort or struggle. "Your mind," the monk said softly, his words falling into the silence like gentle rain on still water, "is like this pond. Right now, at this very moment, it is full of ripples from all the stones that life has thrown into it throughout the years. Worries about money that create waves of anxiety, fears about the future that disturb your natural calm, regrets about the past that muddy the clear water of present moment awareness, endless lists of things to do and places to go and problems to solve that keep the surface of your consciousness in constant motion. Each thought that arises in your mind is like another stone being thrown into the water. Each worry creates new ripples that spread and interact with other ripples, creating more complex patterns of disturbance. Each mental rehearsal of problems that might never happen, each replay of conversations that didn't go the way you wanted, each moment of planning and calculating and trying to control outcomes that are ultimately beyond your control, all of these are stones that you yourself are throwing into the pond of your own peace. The monk paused and reached down to pick up a handful of small pebbles from the shore. "But watch what happens when I stop throwing stones," he said, and then he did exactly that. He set the remaining pebbles down beside him and simply waited, his hands resting calmly in his lap, his attention focused entirely on the surface of the water. "The pond doesn't try to calm itself," the monk continued, his voice as gentle as wind through leaves. "It doesn't struggle against the ripples that are already there, doesn't fight to become still, doesn't effort its way back to peace. It simply stops receiving new disturbances, and its natural state of clarity and calm returns by itself, as automatically as flowers turn towards sunlight or rivers flow toward the sea." Kenzo found himself staring at the pond with an intensity that surprised him, mesmerized by its perfect stillness. By the way, it seemed to embody a quality of peace that he had almost forgotten was possible. He realized that he couldn't remember the last time he had looked at anything for more than a few seconds without his mind immediately jumping to something else, some task or worry or plan that demanded his attention. But here, watching this water, he felt something in his chest beginning to loosen and soften, some tight knot of tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying, had been carrying for so long that it felt like part of his natural anatomy. "But how do you stop the stones?" Kenzo asked, his voice quieter now, less defensive, touched with something that might have been hope. "How do you stop the thoughts when they never stop coming? My mind has been racing for so many years that I don't even know what silence sounds like anymore. How do you quiet something that feels stronger than your will to quiet it?" The monk gestured toward a large flat stone beside the pond, weathered smooth by years of rain and sun, and the patient sitting of countless seekers who had found their way to this place. "Sit," he said simply. "Just for a moment, just for this breath, just for now. Not to achieve anything, or learn anything, or become anything different than what you already are in this moment. Not to stop your thoughts, or fix your problems, or figure out the answers to questions that have been troubling you. Just sit and watch the pond and let it teach you what it knows about stillness, about the possibility of peace that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. Now, dear friend, I want you to understand something crucial about what happens next in Kenzo's story, because it's the same thing that can happen for you, right here, right now, in whatever space you're occupying as you listen to these words. What the monk was offering wasn't a complex technique or an advanced spiritual practice that requires years of training. He was pointing to something so simple and so natural that most people miss it completely, the way we might miss the sound of our own breathing because it's always there. Kenzo looked at his horse, patiently waiting beside his cart, loaded with goods that suddenly seemed less urgent than they had an hour ago. He looked at the sun moving across the sky toward evening, marking time in a way that felt less like pressure and more like natural rhythm. Every instinct that had driven his life for decades screamed at him to get back on the road, to make up for lost time, to keep moving toward his destination and the merchant who was expecting him. But something deeper, something he had almost forgotten, existed beneath all the noise and urgency of his daily life, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this moment was exactly where he was supposed to be. Exactly what he was supposed to be doing. He sat down on the stone and immediately felt how solid and supportive it was, how it had been shaped by countless seasons into exactly the right form for holding a human body in comfortable stillness. At first, predictably, his mind continued its familiar patterns, cataloging all the reasons why this was a waste of time, listing all the things he should be doing instead, calculating the financial cost of this delay in terms that his merchant's brain could understand. The mental radio of worry continued to play its familiar songs, but somehow, with his body settled and his eyes focused on the still water, the volume seemed to turn down just slightly, as if someone had gently adjusted a dial he didn't even know existed. The pond held his gaze with its quiet presence, and there was something almost hypnotic about its perfect stillness, something that invited his attention deeper and deeper, without any effort on his part. There was nothing dramatic happening, nothing to analyze or figure out or achieve. Just this perfect mirror of sky and clouds, this window into depth and clarity that seemed to extend infinitely downward, like looking into the heart of peace itself. And in that simplicity, without his doing anything special or trying to make anything happen, Kenzo felt his breathing naturally begin to slow and deepen, as if his body remembered how to relax and was simply waiting for permission to do so. His shoulders, which had been hunched up around his ears for so many months that the tension felt permanent, slowly began to drop away from his neck. The constant knot in his stomach started to loosen, like a fist gradually opening to reveal what it had been holding too tightly. The familiar tension in his jaw, the result of years of gritting his teeth against stress and uncertainty, began to release in ways that felt almost like crying, though no tears came. It was as if his body was remembering a more natural way of being, a state of relaxation that existed before he learned to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Minutes passed, though Kenzo couldn't have said how many, and wouldn't have cared if he could. Time seemed to move differently here, not like the urgent march of seconds and minutes he was used to, not like the relentless pressure of deadlines and schedules, but more like the gentle flow of seasons, natural and unhurried, and somehow perfectly timed, despite having no particular destination. He found himself breathing in rhythm with the slight breeze that occasionally stirred the surface of the water, breathing out with the settling of leaves that drifted down from the trees above, like gentle blessings, like nature's own form of meditation. "This is what we call stopping," the monk said eventually, his voice so soft it seemed to come from the pond itself, so gentle it felt like a continuation of the silence rather than an interruption of it. Not stopping your life or stopping your responsibilities or stopping your caring about the things that truly matter to you. Simply stopping the endless creation of new ripples, new disturbances, new reasons for your mind to be restless and your heart to be anxious. When you stop feeding the chaos with constant mental activity, peace reveals itself as your natural state, as available as your own breathing, as close as your own heartbeat. As the monk spoke these words, Kenzo felt a truth settling into his bones like warm honey, sweet and nourishing and somehow familiar, as if he was remembering something he had always known, but had forgotten in the busyness of survival and success. He realized that for years, perhaps his entire adult life, he had been trying to find peace by controlling everything around him, by staying ahead of problems, by keeping his mind busy with plans and calculations and strategies for managing an unmanageable world. But peace wasn't something to be achieved or earned or figured out through clever thinking. It was something that emerged naturally when he stopped disturbing it with constant mental activity, the way the pond's stillness returned when the stones stopped falling. Now, let me share with you what this ancient teaching means for your own life, for the struggles you carry, for the peace you're seeking in this very moment. Because what Kenzo discovered by that mountain pond isn't just a beautiful story from long ago and far away. It's a practical wisdom that you can apply right here, right now, to whatever stress or anxiety or mental restlessness you're experiencing as you listen to these words. The practice of stopping that the monk taught is perhaps the most radical thing you can do in a world that profits from your constant movement, your endless consumption, your perpetual state of dissatisfaction and restless seeking. To stop, truly stop, is to discover that most of your suffering comes not from your actual circumstances, but from your relationship to those circumstances, from the stories you tell yourself about what everything means and what might happen next. Think about your own mind right now as you listen. How many mental radios are playing in the background of your consciousness? The news station that keeps you updated on everything that's wrong with the world. The worry channel that replays your fears about money, health, relationships, the future. The planning station that never stops broadcasting your to-do lists and responsibilities. The regret network that specializes in replaying past mistakes and missed opportunities. All of these are like stones being constantly thrown into the pond of your natural peace, creating ripples of disturbance that prevent you from seeing clearly, from thinking wisely, from responding to life from a place of calm rather than reactivity. The beautiful truth that Thich Nhat Hanh taught, and that the monk by the pond understood, is that you have the power to stop throwing these stones. Not through force or struggle or trying to control your thoughts, but through the simple practice of recognizing when you're disturbing your own peace and choosing to stop. Just as Kenzo learned to notice when his mind was racing ahead to problems that might never happen, you can learn to catch yourself in the act of creating unnecessary mental suffering. Let's practice this together right now. Take a slow, deep breath in, and as you breathe, imagine you're sitting beside that mountain pond. Feel your body settling into stillness, the way Kenzo felt the solid stone supporting him. Breathe out and let that exhale release some of the tension you've been carrying, some of the stones you've been throwing into your own mind. Now, notice what's happening in your thoughts right now. What mental radios are playing? What worries or plans or regrets are creating ripples in the pond of your awareness? You don't need to fight against these thoughts or judge them as wrong. Just notice them the way Kenzo noticed the ripples on the pond's surface, with gentle awareness rather than resistance. And then, simply stop adding new stones. Stop feeding the mental chatter with more analysis, more worry, more planning. Just for this breath, just for this moment, let your mind be like the pond when the monk stopped throwing pebbles. Don't try to make the existing ripples disappear, just stop creating new ones. Rest in the awareness that watches thoughts come and go without being disturbed by them, the same awareness that remains calm, whether the pond's surface is rippled or still. This is the practice that can transform your entire relationship to stress and anxiety. Not through positive thinking or trying to control your circumstances, but through this simple, radical act of stopping the constant disturbance of your natural peace. The Buddha taught that peace comes from within, do not seek it without, and this is exactly what he meant. Peace isn't something you have to create or earn or find in perfect external conditions. It's something you uncover by learning to stop covering it up with mental noise. You can practice this stopping anywhere, anytime. When you're stuck in traffic and feeling that familiar rise of frustration, remember the pond and stop throwing new stones of angry thoughts into your mind. When you're lying in bed at night and your thoughts are racing through tomorrow's challenges, remember Kenzo's discovery and simply stop feeding the mental fire with more fuel. When you're in the middle of a difficult conversation, or facing a deadline, or dealing with any of the countless small storms that make up human life, remember that you always have this choice: to add more disturbance, or to let the natural stillness reassert itself. This practice doesn't mean becoming passive or disconnected from life. Kenzo still had to complete his journey, still had to meet his responsibilities, still had to navigate the practical challenges of being a merchant in the world. But he learned to do all of this from a different place inside himself, from the calm center that emerges when you stop constantly stirring up mental dust. From this stillness, you can think more clearly, respond more wisely, and act more effectively than when you're caught in the whirlwind of mental reactivity. The practice is deceptively simple, but don't mistake simplicity for ease. Your mind has been trained for years, perhaps decades, to be constantly active, constantly seeking, constantly disturbing its own peace. Learning to stop this pattern takes patience and gentle persistence, the way a gardener tends a growing plant with daily attention, but without force. Some days the stopping will feel natural and effortless, like settling into warm water. Other days your mind will resist, like a wild horse that doesn't want to be tamed. Both experiences are part of the path. Both are opportunities to practice the art of gentle persistence that leads to lasting peace. remember that you're not trying to stop all thinking, any more than the monk was trying to prevent all ripples from ever appearing on the pond's surface. Thoughts will continue to arise, just as leaves will continue to fall and create gentle disturbances on the water. What you're learning to stop is the unnecessary multiplication of disturbance, the mental habit of taking every small problem and turning it into a major crisis through the power of worried thinking. You're learning to let thoughts arise and pass away naturally, like clouds moving across the sky, without getting caught up in their stories or convinced by their urgency. As we prepare to go deeper into this practice, take a moment to appreciate what you've already experienced just by listening to Kenzo's story, just by allowing yourself this space of quiet attention in the midst of whatever busyness usually fills your days. You are already practicing the art of stopping, already allowing the ripples of daily life to settle by giving yourself this gift of mindful listening. And in this space, healing is not only possible, it is already happening, as natural and inevitable as the ponds return to stillness when the stones stop falling. The path ahead leads deeper into this practice, into more refined ways of recognizing when you're disturbing your own peace, and more skillful methods of returning to the natural stillness that is always available beneath the surface activity of your mind. But for now, simply rest in what you've discovered, like Kenzo resting beside the mountain pond, trusting that this peace you've touched is not something foreign or temporary, but your own true nature, waiting patiently for you to remember how to stop covering it up. Your healing journey continues with each breath, with each moment of stopping, with each choice to let the pond of your mind return to its natural clarity. The still water is always there, waiting beneath whatever ripples may be disturbing the surface. All you have to do is stop throwing stones and let your natural peace reveal itself, as clear and perfect as mountain water reflecting an infinite sky. There once lived a young monk named Jiro, who had dedicated his life to finding perfect peace, but who discovered that the smallest irritations could completely destroy his carefully cultivated calm. He had mastered the art of sitting meditation, could breathe mindfully for hours without distraction, and had memorized hundreds of sutras about compassion and wisdom. But when his sandal strap broke during walking meditation, when rain dripped through a small hole in the monastery roof onto his freshly copied manuscript, or when his bowl cracked just slightly so that his morning tea leaked slowly onto his robes, Jiro would find himself consumed by frustration that seemed entirely disproportionate to these minor inconveniences. Every morning, Jiro would wake with the sincere intention to practice patience and acceptance throughout the day. He would sit in meditation, cultivating loving-kindness and equanimity, feeling deeply connected to the teachings about embracing all of life's experiences with grace. But then he would step outside his small room and immediately encounter what seemed like an endless series of tiny problems designed specifically to test his spiritual progress. A fellow monk would be humming slightly off-key during silent meditation. The morning porridge would be too salty or too bland. Someone would leave the garden gate unlatched, and the wind would bang it repeatedly against the fence. Each of these small disturbances felt like a personal attack on his peace of mind, and Jiro would find himself becoming increasingly agitated as the day wore on, until by evening he felt like a pot of water that had been slowly heated to boiling without anyone noticing. He would return to his meditation cushion feeling defeated and confused, wondering how someone who could sit in perfect stillness for hours could be so easily disturbed by problems that any ordinary person would simply shrug off and forget. Jiro's teacher, an elderly monk named Master Kenji, who had been practicing for more than 50 years, watched his young student struggle with the patient attention of someone who remembered his own similar battles with what the Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh called les petites misères, the little miseries of daily life that can cause as much suffering as any great tragedy if we don't learn to meet them with wisdom. Master Kenji understood that these small irritations were not obstacles to spiritual practice, but rather the very essence of practice itself, opportunities to develop the kind of flexible strength that could bend without breaking under the inevitable pressures of human existence. One morning, when Jiro appeared for their weekly meeting, looking particularly worn down by his ongoing battle with minor frustrations, Master Kenji led him to a part of the monastery grounds that the young monk had never visited before. Hidden behind the main meditation hall, a narrow path wound through a grove of bamboo that grew so thickly that the morning light filtered through the green stalks like sunlight through cathedral windows. But what made this path unique was that it was constructed entirely of living bamboo poles that had been bent and woven together to create a walkway that flexed and moved with every step. This path was built by the monks who came before us, Master Kenji explained, his voice taking on the reverent tone he used when sharing the monastery's deeper teachings. Each bamboo pole was carefully selected and positioned, but none were cut or forced into unnatural shapes. Instead, they were gently guided to bend in ways that honored their natural flexibility, while serving the greater purpose of creating a way for students to walk through the grove. He stepped onto the path, and immediately Jiro could see how the bamboo responded to his teacher's weight, bending slightly but not breaking, creating a surface that was stable enough to walk on, but that moved just enough to require constant attention and adjustment. Your task, Master Kenji continued, is to walk this path every morning for the next month, carrying a bowl of water filled to the very brim. Your goal is not to reach the end without spilling a single drop, because that would be impossible on a surface that moves with every step. Your goal is to learn how to walk gracefully with the movement, to bend with the path rather than fighting against its natural flexibility, and to understand that some spilling is not failure, but simply part of the dance between you and the living wood beneath your feet. Jiro looked at the swaying path with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He could already imagine how frustrating it would be to have his carefully measured steps constantly adjusted by the movement of the bamboo. How annoying it would feel to have water sloshing out of his bowl no matter how carefully he tried to walk. But he trusted his teacher's wisdom, even when he couldn't understand the purpose of what seemed like an exercise designed to increase rather than decrease his daily irritations. The next morning, Jiro filled a simple clay bowl with clear water from the monastery well, measuring carefully until the surface tension held the liquid just barely contained within the rim. He approached the bamboo path with the same focused concentration he brought to his sitting meditation, determined to complete this new practice with the perfection he believed spiritual training required. But the moment he placed his first foot on the flexible surface, everything changed. The bamboo bent beneath his weight in ways he hadn't anticipated, creating a subtle rolling motion that traveled through the interconnected poles like a wave moving through water. He adjusted his balance quickly, but the movement caused a small splash of water to escape from his bowl, creating the first of what would become dozens of tiny failures throughout his journey. By the time he reached the halfway point of the path, his robes were damp with spilled water, and his jaw was clenched with the familiar tension of trying to control something that seemed determined to remain beyond his control. Each morning brought the same challenge, and each morning Jiro found himself battling not only the physical difficulty of walking on an unstable surface, but also his own rising frustration with what seemed like an impossible task. The bamboo responded differently to each step, sometimes bending more than expected, sometimes less, creating a constantly changing landscape beneath his feet that required him to abandon any attempt at maintaining a consistent rhythm or predictable movement. Some days the wind would add an extra element of unpredictability, causing the entire grove to sway gently and making the path even more unstable. On rainy days, the wet bamboo became slippery as well as flexible, adding yet another layer of challenge to what was already a humbling exercise. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift in Jiro's approach to the practice. Perhaps it was the sheer repetition of failure that eventually wore down his resistance to imperfection. Or perhaps it was the growing realization that fighting against the movement of the bamboo only made the walking more difficult and the spilling more dramatic. Whatever the cause, Jiro found himself beginning to soften his rigid expectations and experiment with a different way of moving, one that worked with the path rather than against it. Instead of trying to maintain perfect balance through muscular tension and careful control, he began to let his body find its natural rhythm in conversation with the swaying bamboo. Instead of holding his breath and gripping the bowl with white knuckles, he started to breathe normally and hold the water with a gentle firmness that could adjust to unexpected movements without losing its essential stability. He discovered that the bamboo had its own intelligence, its own way of responding to pressure and weight, and that he could learn to communicate with this intelligence rather than simply trying to dominate it. As his relationship with the path evolved, Jiro began to notice something remarkable happening to his experience of the small irritations that had previously disturbed his peace so dramatically. When his sandal strap broke during walking meditation, instead of feeling that familiar surge of frustrated anger, he found himself responding with the same kind of flexible adjustment he had learned to make on the bamboo path. The broken strap was simply another form of movement beneath his feet, another opportunity to bend without breaking, another chance to practice the dance of graceful adaptation that the path had taught him. When rain dripped through the roof onto his manuscript, instead of seeing it as a disaster that ruined his careful work, Jiro began to understand it as part of the same unpredictable movement that he had learned to navigate each morning on the swaying bamboo. The rain was not an enemy attacking his peace, but simply another element in the constantly changing environment that required his flexible response rather than his rigid resistance. He could adjust his writing position, move his work to a drier spot, or even embrace the water stains as an unexpected form of decoration that made his manuscript unique rather than ruined. The garden gate that banged in the wind no longer felt like a personal assault on his meditation, but rather like the sound of bamboo creaking and swaying in the grove, a natural expression of the world's inherent movement that he could either fight against or dance with. Even the off-key humming of his fellow monk began to sound less like a distraction and more like part of the symphony of imperfection that he was learning to appreciate as the actual music of life rather than noise that needed to be eliminated. After a month of daily practice on the bamboo path, Jiro found that his bowl rarely spilled at all anymore, not because he had learned to control the movement of the bamboo, but because he had learned to move with it so naturally that the water remained stable, even as the surface beneath his feet continued to flex and bend. More importantly, he had discovered that the small irritations of daily life were no longer capable of destroying his peace, because he had developed the same kind of flexible strength that allowed the bamboo to bend in strong winds without breaking. Master Kenji watched this transformation with the quiet satisfaction of a gardener seeing a young plant finally take root and begin to flourish. "Tell me what you have learned," he said one morning as they sat together beside the bamboo grove, listening to the gentle sound of the poles swaying in the breeze. "I have learned that resistance creates suffering," Jiro replied thoughtfully, his voice carrying a new quality of calm confidence that hadn't been there a month earlier. "When I tried to walk on the path as if it were solid and unchanging, every movement felt like a personal attack on my stability. But when I learned to expect movement and work with it rather than against it, the same path became a partner in a dance rather than an opponent in a battle." "And how does this apply to the little miseries you were struggling with before?" Master Kenji asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "The broken sandal strap, the leaking roof, the banging gate, these are all just forms of movement, like the bending bamboo," Jiro said, his understanding growing even as he spoke. "When I meet them with rigid expectations of how things should be, they disturb my peace because I'm fighting against the natural flexibility that life requires. But when I remember the lessons of the bamboo path, I can bend with these small challenges rather than breaking under them, and they become opportunities to practice grace rather than sources of frustration." Master Kenji nodded, approvingly. The Vietnamese teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, called these small daily irritations les petites misères, and he understood that learning to handle them with mindfulness is one of the most important skills a practitioner can develop. Most people think that enlightenment means never being disturbed by anything, but true wisdom is more like the flexibility of bamboo. It can bend with whatever wind is blowing without losing its essential strength and stability. "But there's another layer to this teaching that you're ready to understand now," Master Kenji continued, his voice taking on an even deeper tone of instruction. "The bamboo in this grove doesn't bend alone. Each pole is connected to others through their roots, through the network of underground growth that makes them part of a larger organism. When the wind blows, they support each other's flexibility, creating a collective strength that no single pole could achieve on its own." He gestured toward the grove, where hundreds of bamboo poles swayed together in a coordinated dance that looked almost choreographed. "This is what we call the power of the Sangha, the community of practitioners who support each other's growth and healing. When you practice alone, You have only your own flexibility to rely on when the winds of difficulty blow through your life. But when you practice as part of a community, you can draw on the collective strength of everyone who has learned to bend without breaking. Everyone who has walked the bamboo path of daily irritations and discovered the grace that lies hidden within small challenges. Jiro felt something shift in his understanding, like a door opening onto a vast landscape he hadn't known existed. You mean that when I'm struggling with some small frustration, I can remember that I'm not alone in that struggle? That countless other practitioners have faced similar challenges and learned to meet them with the same kind of flexible wisdom? Exactly, Master Kenji replied. And more than that, you can actually draw on their energy, their accumulated wisdom, their collective strength in the moment when you need it most. When your sandal strap breaks and you feel that familiar rise of irritation, you can pause and remember the bamboo grove. Remember that you are part of a community of people who have learned to dance with life's unpredictability rather than fighting against it. In that moment of remembering, you connect yourself to a source of strength much greater than your individual willpower. Now, dear friend, as you listen to Jiro's story of learning to walk the bamboo path, you might recognize your own relationship with the small irritations that arise in your daily life. Perhaps you've noticed how a delayed train, a slow internet connection, a long line at the grocery store, or a minor miscommunication with a colleague can sometimes disturb your peace more dramatically than much larger challenges. These are your own petites misères, your personal collection of small daily struggles that offer you the same opportunity for practice that the bamboo path offered Jiro. The beautiful teaching hidden within Jiro's story is that you don't have to eliminate these minor irritations from your life in order to find peace. In fact, trying to create perfect conditions where nothing ever goes wrong is like trying to walk on the bamboo path. By making it completely rigid, it misses the entire point of the practice. Instead, you can learn to develop the same kind of flexible strength that allowed Jiro to move gracefully with the swaying bamboo, the same ability to bend with life's inevitable unpredictability without losing your essential stability and calm. Think about the last time you were stuck in traffic, perhaps rushing to an important appointment, while watching the minutes tick by with growing frustration. This is a perfect example of a modern bamboo path, a situation that requires you to adjust your expectations and work with circumstances beyond your control rather than fighting against them. Instead of gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles and adding layers of mental stress to an already challenging situation, you can remember Jiro's lesson and ask yourself, how can I bend with this experience rather than breaking under it? You might take 3 deep breaths and use the unexpected gift of time to practice mindful breathing, turning the traffic jam into a meditation retreat that you didn't plan but can appreciate nonetheless. You might call the person you're meeting to let them know about the delay, transforming potential embarrassment into an opportunity for honest communication. You might even find some gratitude for the chance to slow down in a life that often moves too fast, seeing the traffic as a gentle reminder to practice patience rather than a cosmic conspiracy against your schedule. This is the art of transforming minor frustrations into opportunities for peace, and it's available to you in any moment when life's bamboo path requires you to adjust your balance and find a new way of moving forward. The key is remembering that these small challenges are not interruptions to your spiritual practice. They are your spiritual practice, perfectly designed to help you develop the flexible strength that true peace requires. But here's where the teaching becomes even more powerful and practical for your daily life. Just as the bamboo in Master Kenji's grove drew strength from its connection to the other plants through underground roots, you can draw strength from your connection to what Thich Nhat Hanh called the Sangha, the community of all beings who are walking the path of awakening, learning to bend without breaking, practicing the art of graceful response to life's inevitable challenges. Even though you may be listening to these words alone, perhaps in the quiet of your own room or during a solitary walk, you are actually part of a vast, invisible community of people who are engaged in the same practice of learning to meet life's difficulties with wisdom and compassion. Right now, in this very moment, there are thousands of people around the world who are facing their own versions of broken sandal straps and leaking roofs, their own traffic jams and minor disappointments, their own opportunities to practice the bamboo path of flexible response. Some of them are choosing frustration and resistance, fighting against the movement beneath their feet and spilling the water of their peace with every rigid step. But others are remembering the lessons of flexibility, choosing to bend with their circumstances rather than break under them, finding grace in the midst of imperfection. And when you consciously connect yourself to this second group, when you remember that you are part of a global community of people practicing the art of graceful living, you can draw on their collective wisdom and strength in your own moments of challenge. This is what we mean by the power of the Sangha, and it's not just a beautiful spiritual concept, it's a practical tool that you can use right now to transform your relationship with life's small difficulties. The next time you find yourself feeling irritated by some minor inconvenience, instead of struggling alone with your frustration, you can pause and connect yourself consciously to the community of practitioners who have learned to dance with life's unpredictability. Take a moment right now to practice this connection. Bring to mind some small irritation that you've been carrying, perhaps something that happened earlier today or yesterday that still feels slightly annoying when you think about it. It might be as simple as a website that wouldn't load properly, a phone call that was dropped in the middle of an important conversation, or a piece of food that didn't taste quite the way you expected. Hold this minor frustration gently in your awareness, not trying to make it disappear, but simply acknowledging it as part of your human experience. Now, instead of carrying this irritation alone, imagine that you're standing in a vast grove of bamboo, surrounded by thousands of other people who have faced similar small challenges and learned to meet them with grace. See them swaying gently in the wind of life's unpredictability, bending but not breaking, supporting each other through their shared flexibility and mutual understanding. Feel yourself as part of this community, drawing strength from their collective wisdom, their accumulated experience of learning to transform minor frustrations into opportunities for patience and peace. As you connect with this imagined but very real community of fellow practitioners, notice how your relationship to your small irritation begins to shift. It's still there, still part of your experience, but it no longer feels like such a big problem when you remember that countless others have faced similar challenges and found ways to respond with grace rather than resistance. You're not alone in your struggles with life's imperfections. and you don't have to figure out how to handle them purely through individual effort and willpower. The Buddha once taught his followers that, in the sky, there is no path, but birds fly anyway. This beautiful image captures something essential about the nature of spiritual practice and community support. Even though the path of awakening is not always clearly marked, even though each person's journey is unique and filled with unexpected challenges, we can learn from the example of others who have learned to navigate the pathless sky with grace and wisdom. Just as birds flying in formation can conserve energy by riding the wind currents created by their companions, you can find support and guidance by connecting consciously with the community of all beings who are practicing the art of mindful living. When you remember that you're not alone in your struggles, when you tap into the collective energy of everyone who has ever faced a small frustration and chosen patience over irritation, flexibility over rigidity, grace over resistance, you discover a source of strength that extends far beyond your individual capacity. This doesn't mean that you become dependent on others for your peace of mind, any more than the bamboo becomes dependent on the grove for its ability to bend. The flexibility is still your own, developed through your own practice and experience. But just as the bamboo's individual strength is enhanced by its connection to the larger community of plants, your personal practice becomes more stable and sustainable when you remember that you're part of a vast network of people who are committed to the same path of awakening and transformation. You can access this community support in the most practical ways throughout your daily life. When you're standing in a long line and feeling impatient, instead of focusing on your individual frustration, you can remember that patience is a practice shared by countless people around the world, and you can draw inspiration from their example. When you're dealing with a difficult person and struggling to maintain your composure, you can connect with the energy of all the people who have ever practiced compassion in challenging circumstances, letting their collective wisdom guide your response. Even here, listening to these words as part of the Moonlight Temple community, you're experiencing a form of Sangha support. Though you may be physically alone, you're connected to thousands of other people who have chosen to spend their time seeking peace and wisdom rather than filling their minds with anxiety and distraction. This shared intention creates a field of supportive energy that you can feel if you pay attention, a sense of being held and understood by people who share your values and aspirations, even if you've never met them personally. The practice of drawing on this collective strength becomes especially powerful when you're facing challenges that feel bigger than your individual capacity to handle. Just as Jiro learned to navigate the bamboo path, not through perfect individual control, but through finding harmony with forces beyond his control, you can learn to meet life's difficulties by connecting with the wisdom and strength of the entire human community that has been practicing the art of graceful living for thousands of years. Think of all the mothers throughout history who have found patience in the middle of sleepless nights with crying babies, drawing on some deep well of love that seemed to exceed their individual capacity. Think of all the workers who have found dignity in difficult jobs by connecting with the larger purpose of serving their communities. Think of all the people who have faced illness, loss, disappointment, and hardship with grace and wisdom, leaving behind examples that continue to inspire and support others long after they're gone. This is the true meaning of the Sangha, not just the formal community of monks and nuns in a monastery, but the vast invisible network of all beings who have ever chosen love over fear, patience over irritation, wisdom over reactivity, peace over conflict. When you consciously connect yourself to this community, you gain access to a source of strength and guidance that can support you through any challenge, no matter how small or large. Let's practice together one more time before we continue our journey. Take a slow, deep breath and imagine yourself once again on Jiro's bamboo path, feeling the gentle movement beneath your feet, the constant invitation to find balance through flexibility rather than rigidity. But this time, notice that you're not walking alone. There are others on the path with you, people from every culture and time period, who have learned the art of bending without breaking, who have discovered how to transform life's small difficulties into opportunities for grace. Feel their presence surrounding you like a supportive wind, their collective wisdom available to guide your steps, their shared strength offering you the confidence to meet whatever challenges arise with patience and understanding. You are part of something much larger than your individual struggles, connected to a community of practice that extends across time and space, including everyone who has ever chosen the path of mindful awareness over unconscious reactivity. As you walk this imagined bamboo path, surrounded by this invisible but very real community, feel how much easier it becomes to maintain your balance, how much more natural it feels to bend with the movement rather than fight against it. This is the gift of the Sangha, not to make your practice unnecessary, but to make it more joyful, more sustainable, more connected to the larger purpose of awakening that calls to every human heart. Now, as we prepare to explore the next dimension of this practice together, carry this sense of community support with you. Remember that every small frustration you encounter is an opportunity to practice the bamboo path of flexible response, and that every moment of choosing grace over resistance connects you more deeply to the vast network of people who share your commitment to living with wisdom and compassion. You are never alone in your practice, never isolated in your struggles, never separated from the source of strength that comes from remembering your connection to all beings who walk the path of awakening. The bamboo grove continues to sway in the wind, each pole supporting the others, each movement part of a larger dance of mutual care and shared resilience. And you are part of this dance, this community, this ancient and ever-renewed practice of learning to bend without breaking, to find peace in the midst of life's inevitable imperfections, to discover the extraordinary grace that lies hidden within the most ordinary challenges of human existence. In the high mountains where snow melts into crystal streams, there once rested a small grey pebble named Ishi, who had spent countless seasons nestled comfortably in the same sheltered cove beside a gentle brook. For years beyond counting, Ishi had watched the water flow past with a mixture of admiration and secret fear, marveling at the stream's constant movement, while feeling grateful for the safety and predictability of remaining in exactly the same place, surrounded by familiar stones and the reliable rhythm of water flowing over the same rocks in the same patterns every day. Ishi had developed a deep appreciation for consistency and control. Each morning, the first rays of sunlight would warm the eastern face in precisely the same way, creating a comfortable heat that lasted until the afternoon shadows brought welcome coolness. The water level rose and fell with seasonal changes, but always within predictable ranges that never threatened Ishi's secure position in the protected alcove that felt like the perfect home, designed by nature specifically for a pebble who valued stability above all else. Other stones in the stream bed sometimes spoke of distant places they had seen during their own journeys before settling in this peaceful valley. They told stories of vast lakes that stretched beyond the horizon, of thundering waterfalls that sent spray flying hundreds of feet into the air, of wide rivers that carried countless pebbles and boulders and fallen trees toward mysterious destinations called oceans that none of them had ever seen but all somehow sensed existed somewhere beyond the mountains. These tales filled Ishi with both wonder and anxiety, creating a conflicted longing to experience such adventures, while desperately hoping never to be forced away from the security of this known and comfortable place. One spring, however, the mountain snows melted more rapidly than anyone could remember, swollen by unexpected warm rains that turned the gentle brook into a rushing torrent unlike anything the valley had experienced in generations. Ishi felt the first signs of change as a subtle increase in the current's pressure, a new insistence in the water's voice that spoke of power and urgency and destinations that could not be delayed. Day by day, the protective cove that had seemed so permanent began to feel less secure as the strengthening current probed its edges, testing the boundaries of what had always seemed like an unshakable refuge from the world's constant movement. At first, Ishi tried to resist the change by pressing deeper into the familiar depression in the stream bed, wedging between larger rocks that had always provided shelter, and hoping desperately that the increased flow would soon return to its normal, gentle pace. But nature had its own schedule, its own purposes that existed far beyond any individual pebble's preferences or fears, and the current continued to grow stronger with each passing day. The water that had once sung lullabies now roared with the voice of irresistible transformation, carrying with it the urgent message that nothing in the universe can remain static forever, that all things are part of a larger flow that moves according to laws much greater than personal comfort or individual will. One morning, after a night of particularly heavy rain that sent torrents of water cascading down every mountainside, Ishi felt the unmistakable sensation of the stream bed shifting and changing. The protective rocks that had provided security for so long began to loosen and move, rearranged by forces that made their previous immobility seem like nothing more than a temporary pause in an endless dance of water and stone. And then, with a movement that felt both terrifying and strangely liberating, Ishi felt the familiar grip of the cove release its hold, felt the irresistible pull of the current lifting and carrying away everything that had once seemed permanent and unchangeable. The first moments of being carried by the stream were unlike anything Ishi had ever experienced or imagined. There was an initial panic, a desperate attempt to somehow grab onto something solid and stable, to find a new place to lodge and recreate the security of the old familiar resting place. But the current was too strong, and the movement too swift for any such resistance to be effective, and gradually, Ishi began to realize that fighting against the flow only created additional turbulence and confusion, making the journey more chaotic and frightening than it needed to be. Slowly, with the kind of wisdom that can only come from having no other choice, Ishii began to experiment with a different approach to this unwanted adventure. Instead of trying to control the direction of movement or the speed of travel, instead of attempting to predict what would happen next, or to prepare for imagined disasters around every bend in the stream, Ishii gradually learned to simply be present with each moment of the journey, to experience each sensation as it arose without immediately judging it as good or bad, safe or dangerous, desirable or terrifying. The first lesson came when Ishii discovered that relaxing into the current's embrace actually made the ride smoother and more graceful. When held rigid with fear and resistance, every contact with other stones felt like a collision. Every change in the water's speed felt like a threat. Every turn in the stream's course felt like a catastrophe waiting to happen. But when Ishii learned to soften and flow with the movement rather than against it, the same physical experiences transformed into something more like a dance, a graceful progression through an ever-changing landscape that revealed new wonders with every twist and turn of the waterway. Rolling and tumbling through deeper pools, Ishii experienced the strange joy of weightlessness, of being completely supported by the water's buoyant embrace without any need for effort or struggle. Sliding over smooth rock faces worn slick by countless years of flowing water, Ishii felt the exhilaration of pure movement, of traveling faster than had ever seemed possible while nestled safely in the static cove. Even the moments of being temporarily caught in small eddies or trapped briefly behind fallen logs became opportunities to rest and observe, to appreciate the journey's variety, and to gather energy for the next phase of movement toward destinations still unknown but no longer feared. As days passed and the stream carried Ishii through landscapes that grew increasingly diverse and beautiful, a profound understanding began to emerge about the nature of life itself and the relationship between security and growth, between control and trust, between resistance and flow. The protected cove that had once seemed like the perfect home now appeared in memory as a kind of beautiful prison, a place where safety had been purchased at the cost of experience, where the illusion of control had prevented the discovery of capabilities and strengths that could only be revealed through embracing uncertainty and change. Ishii began to understand why the great teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, had often spoken about the importance of going as a river rather than trying to exist as isolated drops of water. A single drop, standing alone, can only reflect a tiny fragment of the sky and will quickly evaporate when exposed to the sun's heat. But a drop that joins the river becomes part of something infinitely larger and more powerful, contributing its essence to a flow that can carve grand canyons, nourish vast forests, and eventually reach the limitless ocean that connects all water to its ultimate source and destination. The stream carried Ishii through meadows, where wildflowers created carpets of color that shifted and changed with the seasons, past forests, where ancient trees offered shade and the music of countless bird songs, over waterfalls that provided the thrilling experience of flying through air and mist before landing softly in pools below. Each new environment offered different lessons about adaptation and resilience, about finding beauty in unexpected places, about the richness that becomes available when we stop trying to control our circumstances and start learning to dance with whatever life presents. Sometimes the journey involved traveling through narrow channels where the water moved swiftly and the walls seemed to close in on all sides, creating moments of intensity that required complete trust in the current's wisdom. Other times the stream widened into peaceful lakes where Ishi could rest for days or weeks in gentle shallows, surrounded by the calm that comes from being completely supported without any need for effort or vigilance. Both experiences became equally valuable parts of the journey, equally perfect expressions of the river's intelligence and care for everything it carried toward greater wholeness and completion. In the deeper pools, Ishi learned the art of sinking gratefully to the bottom and resting in perfect stillness while the water flowed overhead like a protective blanket. These periods of rest were not interruptions to the journey, but essential parts of it, opportunities to integrate the experiences of movement and change, to absorb the lessons of flexibility and trust that could only be learned through direct experience of being carried by forces greater than individual will or understanding. Even in stillness, Ishi remained part of the river's flow, contributing to its depth and stability, while gathering the energy needed for the next phase of movement toward destinations that revealed themselves gradually, naturally, without any need for anxious planning or fearful anticipation. As seasons changed and the river carried Ishi through landscapes of astonishing variety and beauty, a profound transformation took place in the pebble's understanding of what it meant to live with grace and wisdom. The old attachment to controlling circumstances and maintaining familiar conditions gave way to a deep appreciation for the intelligence inherent in change itself, for the way that life's current always seemed to carry everything toward greater learning, deeper understanding, more complete expressions of each being's essential nature and potential. Ishi began to realize that the stream was not just a physical force moving water and stones toward the ocean, but a perfect metaphor for the way consciousness itself flows through experience, always moving toward greater awareness, deeper compassion, more complete understanding of the interconnectedness that joins all things in one seamless whole. To flow with this current meant to align with the deepest intelligence of existence itself, to trust the same wisdom that guides seeds to become flowers, rivers to reach the sea, and individual awareness to gradually recognize its essential unity with all of life. The Buddha had once taught that attachment is the root of suffering, and Ishi now understood this teaching in the most practical and immediate way. Attachment to the familiar cove had created the illusion of security, while actually preventing the growth and discovery that could only come through embracing change and uncertainty. But letting go of that attachment had not meant losing everything important, as Ishi had feared, but rather discovering capacities for resilience, adaptability, and joy that had always been present, but could never be accessed while clinging to the illusion of control. Now, as you listen to Ishi's story of learning to flow with the river's current rather than fighting against it, you might recognize something familiar in your own relationship with change and uncertainty. Perhaps you've experienced your own version of the protected cove, some situation or relationship or way of being that felt safe and familiar, but gradually began to feel limiting or stagnant. Maybe you felt the first stirrings of life's current beginning to shift the ground beneath your feet, creating the uncomfortable but necessary pressure that signals the need for growth and transformation. The teaching hidden within Ishi's journey is one of the most challenging and liberating insights available to human consciousness, that true security comes not from controlling our circumstances, but from developing the kind of flexible trust that allows us to flow gracefully with whatever changes life brings. This doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to make thoughtful choices about our lives, any more than Ishi became passive while being carried by the stream. It means learning to work with life's current rather than exhausting ourselves by swimming against it, learning to find our stability in our capacity to adapt rather than in our ability to keep everything exactly the same. Think about some change that you've been resisting in your own life, some current of transformation that keeps arising despite your preferences for things to remain familiar and predictable. It might be a change in your work situation, a shift in an important relationship, a health challenge that requires new ways of caring for yourself, or simply the natural progression of aging that asks you to let go of old identities and embrace new phases of growth and understanding. Whatever it is, imagine for a moment what it would feel like to stop fighting against this change and instead ask yourself, how can I flow with this current rather than exhausting myself by swimming against it? This is the practice that Thich Nhat Hanh called going as a river, and it represents one of the most profound shifts available to human consciousness. Instead of seeing yourself as a separate individual trying to control an unpredictable and often threatening world, you begin to understand yourself as part of a larger flow of intelligence and compassion that is always moving toward greater wholeness, deeper understanding, more complete expressions of love and wisdom. From this perspective, even the changes that seem most challenging or unwanted begin to reveal themselves as opportunities for growth, invitations to discover capacities you didn't know you possessed, doorways to experiences of beauty and meaning that could never be accessed while clinging to familiar shores. The art of flowing with life's changes doesn't eliminate all difficulty or uncertainty, just as Ishi's journey down the river included moments of intensity and challenge alongside periods of peaceful rest. But it transforms our relationship to difficulty in ways that make even challenging experiences workable and meaningful. When we stop adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from resistance and resentment, when we learn to meet change with the same kind of graceful acceptance that allows water to flow around rocks rather than trying to push them out of the way, we discover that we have access to much more resilience and creativity than we ever imagined while trying to keep everything under strict control. Now, let's explore together how this wisdom of flowing with change connects to one of the most practical and immediately available forms of spiritual practice: the art of creating small moments of happiness in the midst of whatever circumstances life presents. Because one of the most beautiful discoveries that comes from learning to flow like a river is that happiness doesn't depend on perfect conditions or complete control over our environment. Instead, it emerges naturally when we learn to find joy in the simple fact of being alive, aware, and part of the magnificent flow of existence that connects all things in an intricate web of mutual support and shared becoming. Thich Nhat Hanh often spoke about what he called petty bonheurs, the little happinesses that are available to us in every moment, if we know how to recognize and appreciate them. These are not the dramatic pleasures that depend on special circumstances or extraordinary events, but the quiet joys that arise from paying mindful attention to the simple miracle of ordinary experience. Just as Ishi learned to find wonder in the feeling of water flowing over smooth stones, the play of sunlight through moving water, and the constantly changing panorama of landscapes visible from the river's perspective. We can learn to create moments of genuine happiness by bringing full awareness to the gifts that are always available in the present moment. The practice begins with something as simple as truly tasting your morning tea or coffee, not while distracted by news or email or mental planning for the day ahead, but with the same kind of complete attention that Ishi brought to each new bend in the river. When you hold the warm cup in your hands, feel its weight and texture, smell the rich aroma rising with the steam, and taste the complex flavors that dance across your tongue, you're practicing the art of mindful appreciation that can transform any ordinary moment into a small celebration of being alive. Or consider the simple pleasure of feeling your feet, making contact with the ground as you walk, not as mere transportation to get you from one place to another, but as a form of intimate communication with the earth that supports you. Each step becomes an opportunity to practice gratitude, to remember your connection to the larger web of life, to experience the miracle of a body that knows how to balance and move through space without any conscious effort on your part. This is the kind of happiness that doesn't depend on external circumstances, that can't be taken away by changes in your situation, that actually grows stronger the more you practice recognizing and appreciating it. The Buddha taught that joy is one of the natural qualities of an awakened mind, not something we have to manufacture or achieve through external means, but something that emerges spontaneously when we stop covering it up with mental busyness and unconscious habits of inattention. Like water that becomes clear when we stop stirring up mud from the bottom of a pond, happiness reveals itself as our natural state when we learn to stop disturbing it with constant mental activity and endless seeking for satisfaction in future achievements or perfect conditions. Let's practice together right now this art of creating a small moment of happiness through mindful attention. Begin by taking 3 slow, deep breaths, not trying to change anything or fix anything, but simply arriving more fully in this present moment where you're listening to these words. Notice the sensation of air flowing into your lungs, the gentle expansion of your ribcage, the natural pause between inhalation and exhalation that requires no effort on your part, but creates the perfect rhythm for sustaining life in your body. Now, expand your awareness to include the sounds around you, perhaps the gentle hum of electronics, the distant murmur of traffic, the whisper of air moving through heating or cooling systems, the faint sounds of other people or animals going about their lives in nearby spaces. Instead of dismissing these sounds as distractions or background noise, invite them into your awareness as part of the symphony of life that surrounds you constantly, evidence of the vibrant world of activity and relationship that you're always part of, even when you feel isolated or alone. Feel the surface that's supporting your body right now, whether you're sitting, lying down, or standing. Notice how perfectly it holds your weight, without any effort or struggle, how the force of gravity and the solidity of matter collaborate to give you this fundamental security that you usually take completely for granted. This is another form of happiness hiding in plain sight, this basic experience of being supported by the physical world, of having a body that knows how to rest and be held by whatever it encounters. Bring your attention to the miraculous fact that you can hear and understand these words, that somehow vibrations in the air or electronic signals can carry meaning and feeling across space and time, connecting your consciousness with ideas and emotions that originated in someone else's mind and heart. This capacity for communication and shared understanding is one of the most extraordinary aspects of human experience, yet it's so familiar that we rarely pause to appreciate the wonder of it. Right now, you're participating in a form of communion that transcends the boundaries of individual identity, sharing thoughts and feelings across whatever physical distance separates us. Can you feel how this simple practice of mindful attention naturally gives rise to a quality of appreciation and contentment that doesn't depend on changing anything about your current situation? This is what Thich Nhat Hanh meant by petit bonheurs, the discovery that happiness is not something we have to chase or achieve, but something we can create in any moment by bringing full awareness to the gifts that are already present in our immediate experience. The art of creating these small moments of happiness becomes especially powerful when life feels challenging or difficult, when we're facing changes we didn't choose or circumstances that seem beyond our control. Just as Ishi learned to find wonder and beauty even while being carried by currents that initially felt frightening and overwhelming, we can learn to discover sources of joy and meaning even in the midst of uncertainty, loss, or struggle. This doesn't mean denying the reality of pain or pretending that difficult emotions don't exist, but rather developing the capacity to hold both challenge and appreciation simultaneously, to find islands of peace and beauty, even when the river of our experience is moving through turbulent waters. Think about a recent moment when you were dealing with some form of stress or difficulty, perhaps waiting in a long line, dealing with a frustrating technical problem, or having a challenging conversation with someone important to you. In the midst of that situation, were there any small gifts available that you might have missed because your attention was completely absorbed by the problem you were trying to solve? Maybe there was interesting music playing in the background, or beautiful light coming through a window, or the simple pleasure of breathing freely and having a body that was functioning well despite the mental stress you were experiencing. This is the practice that can transform your entire relationship with life's inevitable challenges, learning to keep part of your awareness open to sources of beauty and meaning, even when another part of your attention is necessarily focused on solving problems or handling difficulties. It's like learning to hear multiple melodies in a complex piece of music, or to appreciate both the foreground and background elements in a beautiful painting. Life always contains multiple layers of experience simultaneously, and the more skilled we become at recognizing and appreciating the positive layers, the more resilient and joyful we become in the face of whatever challenges arise. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. This beautiful teaching points to one of the most wonderful aspects of the small happinesses we can create through mindful attention. They naturally expand and multiply when we share them with others, creating ripples of positive energy that extend far beyond our individual experience. When you take a moment to truly appreciate the taste of your food, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, or the simple pleasure of a comfortable chair supporting your body, you're not just creating happiness for yourself. You're also contributing to the collective energy of appreciation and contentment that makes it easier for everyone around you to remember their own capacity for finding joy in simple things. Just as Ishi's willingness to flow with the river's current created less turbulence and disturbance for all the other stones and creatures sharing the waterway, your practice of creating small moments of happiness creates a more peaceful and positive environment for everyone whose life touches yours. This is particularly important to remember as you continue listening to these teachings and stories, as part of this invisible but very real community of people who have chosen to spend their time cultivating peace and wisdom rather than filling their minds with anxiety and distraction. Every moment that you spend practicing mindful appreciation, every small happiness that you create through paying attention to the gifts of the present moment, adds to the collective energy of healing and transformation that flows through this community like water through a riverbed. You're not just improving your own experience, you're contributing to a larger flow of positive energy that supports and nourishes everyone who participates in this shared practice of awakening. As we prepare to continue our journey together through more stories and teachings that can deepen your capacity for peace and happiness, take a moment to appreciate what you've already experienced simply by giving yourself the gift of this quiet listening time. You've allowed yourself to slow down in a world that often demands constant speed and productivity. You've chosen to feed your mind with wisdom and beauty rather than the anxiety and conflict that dominates so much of our media and conversation. You've practiced the art of receptive attention, opening your heart to teachings that can support your healing and growth. These are all forms of creating happiness in your life, all expressions of the same wisdom that allowed Ishi to transform a frightening experience of being swept away into a beautiful journey of discovery and growth. The river of your life continues to flow, carrying you toward experiences and opportunities for learning that you can't yet imagine. Sometimes the current will feel gentle and supportive. Sometimes it will challenge you to let go of familiar shores and trust in destinations you can't yet see. But in every moment of that journey, you have the capacity to create small happinesses, to find sources of beauty and meaning that don't depend on controlling your circumstances, to flow with grace and appreciation toward whatever wholeness and wisdom await you around the next bend in the river. The practice of creating petit bonheur is always available to you, as close as your next breath, as immediate as the sensation of your feet touching the ground, or your body being supported by whatever surface holds you. And the more you practice this art of mindful appreciation, the more you discover that happiness is not something rare and special that happens only when conditions are perfect, but something abundant and ever-present that reveals itself whenever you remember to look for it with the eyes of wonder and gratitude. Let this practice flow with you into whatever comes next, like water that carries the minerals and nutrients from mountain streams all the way to the vast ocean, where every drop finds its way home to the source from which it originally came. Your happiness, your peace, your capacity for flowing gracefully with life's changes, all of these are part of the same infinite river of consciousness that connects you to every being who has ever lived, who lives now, and who will live in the future. And in recognizing this connection, in feeling yourself as part of this larger flow rather than an isolated individual trying to navigate the currents alone, you discover a source of strength and joy that can support you through any experience, carry you toward any destination, and reveal the extraordinary beauty that lives hidden within even the most ordinary moments of human existence. There once lived a humble woman named Akari who served as the lantern keeper for a small mountain village nestled in a valley so remote that travelers rarely found their way there, and those who did often arrived lost and weary after days of wandering through forests that seemed to shift and change with each season. For 20 years, Akari had faithfully tended the great stone lantern that stood at the village entrance, lighting it each evening as the sun disappeared behind the peaks, and extinguishing it each dawn when the first rays of natural light began to illuminate the narrow streets and humble wooden houses where her neighbors lived their quiet, unhurried lives. The lantern itself was a work of ancient craftsmanship, carved from a single piece of pale granite, and designed with such skill that it seemed to glow from within, even when unlit, as if the stone itself had absorbed decades of warm light and learned to radiate a gentle presence that welcomed both villagers returning from their daily work and strangers seeking shelter from the mountain's unpredictable weather. But what made Akari's responsibility truly sacred was not just the physical act of maintaining the flame, but the understanding that this light served as more than mere illumination for dark paths and uncertain steps. It was a beacon of hope and safety, a symbol of the village's commitment to offering refuge and comfort to anyone who needed rest, guidance, or simply the reassurance that somewhere in the world's vast darkness, caring people maintained sources of warmth and welcome. In the early years of her service, Akari had approached her duties with the enthusiastic dedication of someone who felt honored to be entrusted with such an important responsibility. She would arrive at the lantern each evening well before sunset, carefully cleaning the glass panels that protected the flame from wind and rain, trimming the wick to ensure steady burning, and checking the oil reservoir to make certain the light would burn brightly throughout the entire night without faltering or failing. The ritual of lighting the lantern had become one of the most meaningful moments of her day, a time when she felt deeply connected to the generations of keepers who had performed this same sacred task, maintaining an unbroken chain of light that stretched back through centuries of village history. But as the years passed and the repetitive nature of her duties became more familiar, Akari gradually began to lose touch with the sense of purpose and meaning that had originally inspired her commitment to this work. The daily tasks of cleaning and filling and lighting began to feel more like mindless routine than sacred practice, something she could perform efficiently while her thoughts wandered to other concerns, other desires, other possibilities for how she might spend her time and energy. She found herself going through the motions of tending the lantern while her mind raced ahead to evening meals or social visits, or drifted backward to replay conversations and interactions from earlier in the day, or spun elaborate fantasies about different lives she might have lived if she had made different choices years ago. Without realizing what was happening, Akari had begun to live her life in a state of constant distraction, physically present at the lantern, but mentally absent from the actual experience of caring for the flame that depended on her attention and dedication. She still performed her duties correctly from a technical standpoint, but the joy and reverence that had once made this work feel like a spiritual practice had slowly evaporated, leaving behind only the empty shell of habitual behavior, performed without awareness or appreciation. Her inner light, the natural radiance of mindful presence that had once made her face shine with the same warm glow as the lantern she tended, began to dim and flicker like a flame that wasn't receiving enough oxygen to burn clearly and steadily. The villagers began to notice subtle changes in Akari's demeanor and energy, though they couldn't quite identify what was different about their beloved lantern keeper. She still arrived punctually each evening and performed her tasks with technical competence, but something essential seemed to be missing from her presence, some quality of warmth and attention that had always made people feel truly seen and welcomed when they encountered her near the village entrance. Children who had once delighted in watching her light the lantern now found her distracted and somewhat distant, as if she was looking through them rather than seeing them clearly. Even the lantern itself seemed to burn differently, still providing adequate illumination, but somehow lacking the special quality of warmth and invitation that had once made it famous throughout the surrounding mountains as a place where travelers could always find comfort and guidance. One evening in late autumn, when the first cold winds were beginning to strip the leaves from the maple trees that lined the village streets, an elderly monk appeared at the lantern just as Akari was going through her usual routine of preparing for the nightly lighting. He was not traveling with the usual urgency of someone seeking shelter before darkness fell, but moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned to find his home in any moment, any place, any circumstance that life presented. Instead of asking for directions or requesting information about lodging for the night, he simply sat down on the stone bench beside the lantern and began to watch Akari work with the kind of complete attention that she had almost forgotten was possible. At first, Akari felt somewhat self-conscious about being observed so closely while performing tasks that had become so automatic, she rarely thought about them consciously. But as she continued with her preparations under the monk's gentle but unwavering gaze, something began to shift in her awareness, as if his quality of mindful presence was somehow contagious, inviting her to bring more attention to actions she had been performing unconsciously for months. She found herself noticing details of her work that she hadn't paid attention to in years, the satisfying weight of the oil as she poured it into the reservoir, the precise sound of the glass panels clicking into place, the way the wick absorbed the fuel and prepared itself to receive the spark that would transform it into a source of light. When the time came to actually light the lantern, the monk spoke for the first time since his arrival, his voice carrying the same quality of peaceful attention that characterized his physical presence. "May I ask you something about your practice?" he said gently, and something in his tone made Akari pause, with the burning taper halfway to the wick, suddenly realizing that she couldn't remember the last time anyone had referred to her work as a practice, rather than simply a job or responsibility. "My practice?" she replied, genuinely confused by the question. "I'm just lighting the lantern, the same as I do every evening. There's nothing special about it, nothing that could be called a practice in any meaningful sense of the word." The monk smiled with the kind of gentle understanding that comes from having walked many paths and encountered many forms of unconsciousness masquerading as ordinary life. "Tell me," he said softly, "when you light this lantern each evening, what do you see? What do you experience in the moment when the flame springs to life and begins to illuminate the darkness around us?" Akari realized with a shock of recognition that she couldn't answer his question because she hadn't truly seen or experienced the lighting of the lantern in months, maybe years. She had been so lost in mental distractions, so caught up in thinking about other things while her hands performed familiar motions that she had completely missed the actual moment of transformation when darkness gave way to light, when the careful preparation culminated in the miracle of illumination that made everything else possible. She had been present in body but absent in spirit, going through the motions of tending the light while remaining blind to the wonder and meaning of what she was actually doing. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper as the full extent of her unconsciousness began to dawn on her. "I haven't really been paying attention. I've been thinking about other things, worrying about other matters, planning other activities. I've been everywhere except right here, doing everything except what I'm actually doing." The monk nodded with compassion rather than judgment, recognizing in Akari's honest confession a moment of awakening that could transform not only her relationship to her work, but her entire experience of being alive in the world. "This is the most common form of suffering," he said gently, "and also the most unnecessary. We spend our lives waiting for something better to happen, thinking about somewhere else we'd rather be, planning for some future moment when we imagine we'll finally be happy and fulfilled. And in doing so, we completely miss the actual gifts that are being offered to us right here, right now, in whatever we're actually doing." He gestured toward the unlit lantern with a movement that seemed to encompass not just the physical object, but everything it represented: the opportunity for service, the daily renewal of commitment, the simple miracle of bringing light into darkness. "Your lantern is not just a tool for providing illumination," he continued, his words carrying the weight of deep understanding earned through years of his own practice. "It is a perfect teacher for the most important lesson anyone can learn: how to tend the light that already exists within your own consciousness, how to recognize and appreciate the conditions for happiness that are always available if you know how to see them clearly." "But I don't understand," Akari said, feeling both intrigued and confused by the monk's words. "What does lighting a lantern have to do with inner light or conditions for happiness? This is just a job that needs to be done, a service the village requires. How can such ordinary work become a spiritual practice?" The monk's smile deepened, and in his eyes, Akari could see the reflection of her own lantern multiplied into countless points of light, as if his consciousness contained infinite opportunities for illumination and wonder. "Watch carefully this time," he said, "and I will show you how every moment of your work is an opportunity to practice the art of mindful appreciation that can transform any activity into a source of joy and meaning." Together, they began the process of lighting the lantern again, but this time the monk guided Akari's attention to aspects of the experience she had been unconsciously overlooking for years. As she cleaned the glass panels, he invited her to notice the way the cloth moved in smooth circles, the satisfaction of seeing dirt and dust disappear to reveal the clear transparency that would allow light to shine forth unobstructed. This cleaning is like the meditation that removes the accumulated dust of mental distraction from the clear mirror of awareness, he explained, allowing your natural capacity for joy and peace to shine forth without interference. As she filled the oil reservoir, he encouraged her to feel the weight and texture of the fuel that would sustain the flame throughout the night, to appreciate the way this simple substance could be transformed into hours of steady illumination through the alchemy of fire and intention. "This oil is like the love and attention you bring to whatever you're doing," he said softly. "The inner resource that can sustain any activity and transform it from mere duty into genuine spiritual practice." As she trimmed the wick to the precise length that would ensure clean, steady burning, he pointed out how this careful preparation created the conditions for the flame to burn at its brightest and most stable, without the smoking and flickering that result from inadequate attention to detail. "The wick is like your own capacity for presence," the monk explained, "and trimming it is like the daily practice of returning your attention to the present moment, cutting away the excess mental activity that prevents clear awareness from manifesting naturally." When the moment finally came to bring the burning taper to the prepared wick and watch the flames spring to life, the monk asked Akari to pause and really see what was happening, to witness the exact instant when careful preparation culminated in the sudden appearance of light where there had been only darkness moments before. As the flame caught and began to burn steadily, casting warm light in expanding circles that gradually illuminated the lantern, the bench, the surrounding trees, and their own faces, Akari felt something inside her own consciousness kindle in response, as if the external light had awakened a corresponding illumination within her heart and mind. For the first time in months, she was completely present to the moment, completely absorbed in the simple miracle of tending a flame, completely aware of the beauty and meaning inherent in this most basic of human activities. The distracted thoughts and mental wandering that usually filled her consciousness had temporarily ceased, leaving behind a quality of clear, spacious awareness that felt both deeply familiar and surprisingly fresh, like coming home to a place she had never left, but had somehow forgotten how to recognize. This is what the great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh meant when he spoke about recognizing the conditions for happiness that are always available to us, the monk said, his voice now seeming to come from the same source as the light itself. Happiness is not something we achieve by changing our circumstances or acquiring new possessions or reaching some future goal. It is something we discover by bringing complete attention to whatever we're doing right now, finding the extraordinary within the ordinary, recognizing the sacred within the mundane activities that fill our daily lives. Over the following weeks, with the monk's gentle guidance and her own growing commitment to practicing mindful attention, Akari began to transform her entire relationship not only to her work as lantern keeper, but to every aspect of her daily existence. Each evening's lighting of the lantern became an opportunity to practice presence, gratitude, and appreciation for the simple miracle of being alive and able to serve something larger than her individual concerns and preoccupations. She learned to find joy in the feeling of cool autumn air on her skin as she worked, in the sound of her footsteps on the stone path leading to the lantern, in the way shadows danced and shifted as the flame grew stronger and began to fulfill its purpose of bringing light into darkness. But the transformation extended far beyond her work at the lantern, rippling out into every corner of her daily experience as she learned to apply the same quality of mindful attention to activities she had previously performed unconsciously or with resentment. Preparing her simple evening meal became an opportunity to appreciate the colors and textures of vegetables from her garden, the satisfying warmth of soup simmering on her stove, the nourishing gift of food that sustained her body and gave her energy for service. Walking through the village to visit neighbors or run errands became a meditation on the feeling of her feet, making contact with familiar paths, the changing quality of light as clouds moved across the mountain sky, the friendly greetings and small conversations that wove her life together with the lives of everyone around her. Even the most mundane activities, washing dishes, sweeping floors, mending clothes, began to reveal hidden opportunities for presence and appreciation when approached with the same kind of reverent attention she now brought to tending the lantern. The warm water flowing over her hands as she cleaned her dinner bowl became a source of simple pleasure rather than a chore to be rushed through. The rhythmic motion of the broom across her wooden floors became a form of moving meditation that calmed her mind and connected her to the satisfaction of creating order and cleanliness in her small living space. Even the careful attention required to repair a torn seam or replace a missing button became an opportunity to practice patience and precision, to find meaning in the ancient human art of caring for the things that care for us. What surprised Akari most was how this shift in the quality of her attention naturally gave rise to a deep sense of contentment and joy that didn't depend on any external circumstances beyond those that were already present in her ordinary life. She hadn't acquired any new possessions, hadn't changed her living situation, hadn't found a romantic partner, or achieved some long-sought goal. Instead, she had simply learned to recognize and appreciate the conditions for happiness that had been available to her all along, hidden in plain sight within the most basic activities of daily existence. The villagers began to notice the change in their lantern keeper, though few could articulate exactly what was different about her presence and energy. The lantern itself seemed to burn more brightly and warmly than it had in years, as if Akari's renewed attention and care had somehow enhanced its natural capacity to provide comfort and guidance to anyone who needed it. Children once again gathered to watch the evening lighting ceremony, drawn by something in Akari's demeanor that made the simple act of kindling a flame feel like a celebration worthy of witness and participation. Even travelers who had visited the village in previous years commented that the lantern seemed more welcoming, more genuinely helpful in providing the sense of safety and orientation that wanderers needed when arriving in an unfamiliar place after dark. One evening, several months after the monk's visit, Akari realized with a start that she hadn't seen him for weeks and wondered if he had continued on his journey to destinations unknown. But as she went through her now beloved ritual of preparing and lighting the lantern, she felt his presence as strongly as if he was still sitting on the stone bench, still offering the gift of his mindful attention to her work. She understood that the true gift he had given her was not his physical presence or even his specific teachings, but rather the reminder of her own capacity for awareness and appreciation, her own ability to find profound meaning and satisfaction within the simplest activities of ordinary life. Now, dear friend, as you listen to Akari's story of learning to tend her inner light through the practice of mindful attention, you might recognize your own opportunities to transform routine activities into sources of genuine happiness and spiritual nourishment. Perhaps you've been going through the motions of your own daily responsibilities, while your mind wanders to other concerns, other desires, other possibilities for how you might spend your time and energy. Maybe you've been waiting for conditions to change, for circumstances to improve, for some future moment when you imagine you'll finally have permission to be happy and fulfilled, and in doing so, you've been missing the actual gifts that are being offered to you right here, right now, in whatever you're actually doing. The beautiful teaching hidden within Akari's transformation is that any activity, no matter how ordinary or repetitive, can become a doorway to presence and appreciation when approached with the right quality of attention. Your morning coffee or tea can become a meditation on warmth, aroma, and the simple pleasure of nourishing your body with something that brings comfort and energy. Your daily commute can become an opportunity to practice patience, to notice the changing landscape around you, to appreciate the miracle of transportation that carries you safely from one place to another without any conscious effort on your part. Even washing dishes or doing laundry can become a form of mindfulness practice when you bring full attention to the sensations, sounds, and simple satisfactions involved in caring for the objects that support your daily life. Think about some routine activity in your own life that you've been performing unconsciously, perhaps with boredom or resentment, while your mind focuses on things you'd rather be doing or places you'd rather be. It might be as simple as brushing your teeth, making your bed, or preparing a meal for yourself or your family. What would it feel like to approach this activity with the same kind of reverent attention that Akari learned to bring to lighting her lantern? What sources of satisfaction, beauty, or meaning might you discover if you brought complete presence to actions you've been performing automatically while thinking about something else? This is the practice that can transform your entire experience of being alive, learning to find the extraordinary within the ordinary, recognizing the sacred within the mundane activities that fill your days, discovering that happiness doesn't require perfect circumstances, but rather perfect attention to whatever circumstances are actually present. Like Akari's lantern, your inner light burns most brightly when you tend it with care and consistency, when you remember that your consciousness itself is the most precious flame you'll ever be responsible for maintaining, and that every moment of mindful attention is like adding oil to the reservoir that sustains this inner illumination. But beyond the personal transformation that comes from this practice of mindful attention, there's another dimension to Akari's story that points toward an even deeper source of healing and peace. Just as her renewed presence and care enhanced the lantern's capacity to provide comfort and guidance to everyone who encountered it, your own practice of bringing mindful attention to daily activities creates ripples of positive energy that extend far beyond your individual experience. When you tend your inner light with consistency and devotion, you naturally become a source of warmth and stability for everyone whose life touches yours, offering the same kind of refuge and orientation that Akari's lantern provided for travelers navigating unfamiliar territory in the darkness. Now, let's explore together how this practice of tending your inner light connects to one of the most fundamental and accessible forms of spiritual practice, the healing art of mindful walking and breathing. Because just as Akari learned to find profound meaning in the simple act of caring for a flame, you can learn to discover extraordinary peace and healing in the most basic activities of human existence, the simple acts of placing one foot in front of the other and drawing breath into your lungs. These practices, which Thich Nhat Hanh taught with such gentle wisdom throughout his life, offer immediate access to the same quality of presence and appreciation that transformed Akari's relationship to her work and her world. Every step you take, can become an opportunity to practice gratitude for the body that carries you through the world, the earth that supports your weight, the miraculous coordination of muscles and bones and nervous system that allows you to move through space without conscious effort. Every breath you draw can become a meditation on the gift of life itself, the invisible sustenance that flows continuously through your body, the intimate exchange between your individual existence and the vast atmosphere that connects you to every other living being on this planet. When you learn to bring the same quality of mindful attention to walking and breathing that Akari brought to lighting her lantern, you discover that healing is not something that happens only in special circumstances or through complex techniques, but something that can occur with every step, every breath, every moment of remembering to be fully present to the miracle of simply being alive. Let's begin this practice together right now, even if you're sitting or lying down as you listen to these words. Start by bringing your attention to your breathing, not trying to change it or control it in any way, but simply noticing the natural rhythm that has been sustaining your life since the moment you were born. Feel the air flowing into your nostrils, cooling slightly as it enters your body, then warming as it travels down into your lungs, where it participates in the ancient alchemy that extracts oxygen from the atmosphere and distributes it to every cell in your body. Notice the gentle pause between inhalation and exhalation, the moment of stillness that exists at the turning point of each breath cycle, like the quiet space between waves at the ocean's edge. Now, as you breathe out, feel how your body naturally relaxes and settles, releasing tension you may have been holding without awareness, letting go of effort, and allowing gravity to support you more completely. With each exhale, imagine that you're releasing not only carbon dioxide, but also any mental preoccupations that have been disturbing your peace, any worries about the future, or regrets about the past that have been preventing you from resting fully in this present moment. Let your breathing become like Akari's lantern flame, steady, warm, continuous, requiring no effort, but offering constant nourishment and illumination to everything around it. This practice of mindful breathing can become your refuge in any moment of stress, confusion, or emotional disturbance. When you find yourself caught in a difficult conversation with someone whose words trigger anger or defensiveness, you can return to your breath and discover the space you need to respond with wisdom rather than reacting unconsciously. When you're facing a challenging decision and your mind is spinning with anxiety about possible outcomes, you can anchor yourself in the rhythm of breathing and access the clarity that emerges when you're not lost in mental projections about an uncertain future. Even in moments of physical pain or emotional grief, your breath remains available as a constant companion, a source of stability and comfort that doesn't depend on external circumstances, but arises from your most basic connection to the life force that animates your entire existence. If you're able to stand and walk as you listen, or when you next have the opportunity to move through space on your own feet, you can extend this practice into the meditation of mindful walking that has been practiced by seekers of wisdom for thousands of years. Begin by standing still for a moment and feeling your connection to the ground beneath your feet, noticing how the earth supports your weight without effort or complaint, offering you the fundamental security that makes all movement possible. Feel the way your body naturally finds its balance, making countless tiny adjustments below the threshold of conscious awareness, responding to subtle shifts in position and orientation with the grace and intelligence that have been perfected through millions of years of evolutionary development. When you're ready to begin walking, start more slowly than feels natural, giving yourself permission to move with the kind of deliberate attention that transforms ordinary locomotion into spiritual practice. Lift one foot and feel the way your weight shifts completely onto the supporting leg. Notice the complex coordination required to maintain balance while transitioning from one step to the next. Place your foot down gently, as if you're greeting the earth with each step, as if the ground itself is sacred and deserving of your respect and appreciation. Coordinate your breathing with your movement, perhaps breathing in as you lift each foot and breathing out as you place it down, or finding whatever rhythm feels natural and sustainable for your individual body and circumstances. As you continue walking in this mindful way, you'll begin to notice that the simple act of moving through space becomes a form of meditation that naturally calms your mind and opens your heart. The rhythmic coordination of breath and movement creates a kind of moving prayer, a physical expression of gratitude for the gift of embodied existence that connects you intimately to the present moment and gradually dissolves the mental chatter that usually fills your consciousness. Each step becomes an opportunity to practice letting go of the past step and the future step, to rest completely in the simple reality of this foot, making contact with this particular spot on the earth at this exact moment in time. The Buddha once taught his followers that if you are facing in the right direction, all you need to do is keep walking. This beautiful teaching points to the way that consistent practice of mindful movement and breathing naturally leads you toward greater peace, wisdom, and compassion without any need for complex strategies or dramatic breakthroughs. When you learn to walk and breathe with full attention, you discover that healing happens not through effort or achievement, but through the simple act of returning again and again to presence, to gratitude, to the immediate reality of being alive in a body that knows how to move through the world with grace and purpose. The practice of mindful walking becomes especially powerful when you're dealing with anxiety, depression, or any form of emotional difficulty that makes sitting still feel impossible or counterproductive. Unlike meditation practices that require you to remain motionless, walking meditation allows you to work with restless energy while still cultivating the inner stillness that leads to healing and insight. The gentle, repetitive movement can help discharge nervous energy, while the coordination of breath and step provides a focus for attention that gradually draws your awareness away from problematic thoughts and into direct contact with physical, sensation, and immediate experience. You can practice mindful walking anywhere, in your own home, in a park or garden, on city streets, or along country paths, adapting the practice to whatever environment is available to you, while maintaining the essential elements of slow, deliberate movement coordinated with conscious breathing. Even a few minutes of walking this way can transform your entire emotional state, shifting you from agitation to calm, from confusion to clarity, from isolation to a sense of connection with the larger web of life that includes every step taken by every being who has ever walked upon this earth. The healing power of these practices lies not in their complexity, but in their simplicity, not in their novelty, but in their universality. Every human being breathes, every human being walks, and therefore every human being has immediate access to these doorways to presence and peace, regardless of their background, beliefs, or life circumstances. Like Akari's discovery that tending her lantern could become a profound spiritual practice, you can discover that the most basic activities of human existence contain infinite opportunities for healing, growth, and awakening when approached with the right quality of attention and appreciation. As we prepare to continue our journey together into the final story and teachings that will complete this exploration of ancient wisdom for modern healing, take a moment to appreciate what you've already experienced through simply giving yourself the gift of mindful listening, conscious breathing, and whatever movement has been possible for you during this time. You have been practicing presence, practicing gratitude, practicing the art of finding meaning and satisfaction within whatever circumstances are actually available to you, rather than waiting for perfect conditions that may never arrive. These are the same skills that can transform any moment of your life into an opportunity for healing, any activity into a doorway to peace, any step into progress toward the freedom and wisdom that constitute your deepest nature and highest possibility. The path ahead leads toward an understanding of how this individual practice of tending your inner light connects to the larger story of human awakening, how your personal healing contributes to the healing of our entire world, and how the peace you discover within yourself naturally radiates outward to bless everyone whose life touches yours. But that understanding emerges naturally from the foundation we're building together through these simple practices of mindful attention, conscious breathing, and grateful walking through whatever landscape your life presents. Keep tending your inner light with the same devotion that Akari brought to her village lantern, and trust that this light will guide you toward exactly the understanding and experiences your heart needs for its complete fulfillment and your soul's ultimate liberation. There once lived a wanderer named Saku, who had spent 30 years of his life traveling the world in search of a peace that always seemed to remain just beyond the next mountain, just around the next bend in the river, just waiting in the next temple or ashram or sacred site that promised to hold the answer to the restless longing that had driven him from his childhood village and kept him moving through countless landscapes, countless teachings, countless encounters with wise teachers and fellow seekers who spoke of enlightenment and liberation but somehow never quite provided the complete satisfaction and rest that his heart had been seeking since he first began to wonder about the meaning of existence. Saku had studied with meditation masters in remote monasteries perched on Himalayan cliffs, where the air was so thin that every breath required conscious effort, and the silence was so profound that he could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the stone walls of ancient practice halls. He had learned breathing techniques from yogis who claimed to have transcended the need for ordinary consciousness, chanting practices from devotees who said their mantras could dissolve the ego and reveal the true self that lies hidden beneath layers of conditioning and fear. He had fasted for weeks in desert caves, participated in ceremonies with indigenous shamans who worked with sacred plants, and claimed direct access to cosmic consciousness. and spent months in solitary retreat following the instructions of teachers who promised that sufficient effort and dedication would eventually lead to the permanent peace that all spiritual seekers ultimately desire. But somehow, despite all his sincere efforts and the genuine insights he had gained along the way, Saku still found himself carrying an underlying sense of incompleteness, a subtle but persistent feeling that he hadn't yet found what he was truly looking for, that the real treasure remained hidden somewhere else, waiting to be discovered in some future experience or deeper level of practice. Even in his most profound meditation states, even in moments of genuine bliss and expanded awareness, there remained a small voice in the back of his mind that whispered, "This is beautiful, but it's not quite it. The real thing must be somewhere else, something more, something that will finally satisfy this longing once and for all." As the years passed, and Saku moved from teacher to teacher, from practice to practice, from one spiritual community to another, he began to notice a pattern in his seeking that troubled him deeply. No matter how profound the teaching, how sincere the teacher, how dedicated the community of practitioners he joined, he would inevitably reach a point where the initial excitement and sense of discovery gave way to a familiar restlessness, a growing conviction that he needed to move on, to find something better, something more complete, something that would finally deliver the ultimate fulfillment that had been motivating his search for 3 decades. He began to wonder if perhaps he was fundamentally flawed in some way, incapable of the kind of commitment and dedication that seemed to allow other seekers to find satisfaction and rest within a particular path or tradition. One autumn morning, after leaving yet another ashram where he had spent several months following a practice that had initially seemed promising, but gradually began to feel insufficient and incomplete, Saku found himself walking along a mountain path with no particular destination in mind, carrying only a small pack with basic supplies and a heart heavy with the accumulated disappointment of countless unsuccessful searches for lasting peace. The path wound through forests of golden maple and dark evergreen, past streams that sparkled in the crisp mountain air, through landscapes of such natural beauty that even his weary soul couldn't help but respond with moments of appreciation and wonder. But underneath his aesthetic appreciation ran the familiar undercurrent of restless seeking, the persistent sense that even this beauty was pointing towards something else, something more, something that remained tantalizingly out of reach. For 3 days, Saku walked without any clear sense of direction, following paths that seemed to choose themselves, guided more by intuition than by conscious planning or any specific knowledge of the terrain he was traversing. He ate simple meals of rice and vegetables from his pack, slept under stars that seemed both infinitely distant and intimately present, and found himself gradually settling into a rhythm of movement and rest that felt more natural and unforced than any spiritual practice he had followed in years. The very absence of spiritual goals and techniques, the simple act of walking through beautiful country without trying to achieve anything or get anywhere in particular, began to create a quality of mental spaciousness that he had almost forgotten was possible. On the 4th morning, as the path crested a ridge that had been climbing steadily since dawn, Saku found himself looking down into a valley unlike any he had ever seen, a place that seemed to exist outside of ordinary time and space, untouched by the restless energy of human ambition and desire that had colored every spiritual community and sacred site he had visited in his long years of searching. The valley was small and perfectly circular, surrounded by gentle hills covered with ancient trees that seemed to radiate an almost palpable sense of peace and stability. A clear stream meandered through meadows of wild grass and scattered wildflowers, creating the kind of natural music that seemed to arise directly from the earth's own contentment, with simply being what it was, without any need for improvement or transformation. What struck Saku most powerfully about this hidden valley was not its beauty, though it was certainly beautiful in a way that made his heart open, like a flower receiving unexpected sunlight, but rather the quality of complete stillness and presence that seemed to emanate from every tree, every stone, every blade of grass, as if the entire landscape had somehow achieved the kind of enlightenment that he had been seeking through decades of spiritual practice. There was no sense of striving here, no feeling that anything needed to be different or better than it already was, no suggestion that this peaceful scene was pointing towards something else or preparing for some future revelation. The valley simply was, completely and perfectly, resting in its own natural state without any agenda or aspiration beyond the simple miracle of existing in this moment, in this form, in this particular expression of the infinite creativity that gives rise to all phenomena. As Saku descended the narrow path that led down into the valley, he felt something beginning to shift in his own consciousness, as if the quality of presence that pervaded this place was somehow contagious, inviting him to drop the mental habits of seeking and evaluation that had colored his perception for so many years. With each step down the hillside, the familiar voice in his mind that constantly compared and analyzed and planned for the next spiritual adventure grew quieter and less insistent, gradually fading into the background, like distant music becoming softer as you walk away from its source. By the time he reached the valley floor and sat down beside the gentle stream to rest and drink the clear mountain water, Saku realized that for the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking about where to go next, what practice to try next, what teacher to seek out next. Instead, he found himself simply sitting by the water, listening to its quiet song, watching the play of light and shadow on the grass around him, breathing the clean air that seemed to carry no message other than its own fresh sweetness. The restless energy that had driven him from place to place, from teacher to teacher, from practice to practice, had somehow dissolved into a quality of natural contentment that felt both deeply familiar and completely new, as if he had finally remembered something essential that he had known as a child, but had somehow forgotten in all his years of spiritual seeking. For the first time in his adult life, Saku felt truly at home, not because he had found the perfect external environment or the ultimate spiritual teaching, but because he had somehow returned to a natural state of being that didn't require anything beyond what was already present in this moment. As hours passed without his notice, Saku began to understand that what he had been seeking through all his travels and studies and practices had never actually been missing or hidden in some distant location or advanced technique. The peace he had been looking for was the same peace that was looking. The awareness he had been trying to cultivate was the awareness that was already present and witnessing all his efforts to find it. The home he had been trying to reach was the consciousness from which he had never actually departed, despite decades of believing himself to be a spiritual exile in need of return. The valley had not given him anything new, but had somehow created the conditions for him to recognize what had always been present, what had been accompanying him through every moment of his search, even when he was convinced that he was far from his spiritual destination. The great teacher Thich Nhat Hanh had often spoken about the importance of coming home to oneself, and sitting beside the stream in this peaceful valley, Saku finally understood what those words pointed toward. Home was not a place to be reached through effort and achievement, not a state to be earned through years of dedicated practice, not a reward waiting at the end of a long spiritual journey. Home was the present moment awareness that was already fully present, already perfectly complete, already offering everything that his heart had been seeking through all its restless wandering through external landscapes in search of internal peace. The valley was beautiful and peaceful, but it was not the source of his contentment. It was simply a mirror that reflected back to him the natural peace and beauty that constituted his own deepest nature, when not obscured by the mental activity of seeking something better, something else, something more. As the sun moved across the sky and afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the valley floor, Saku realized that he could stay in this place forever and be perfectly content. Or he could leave tomorrow and carry the same peace with him wherever he went, because what he had discovered here was not dependent on external circumstances, but rather on a fundamental shift in his relationship to his own experience. The seeking mind that had driven him for 30 years had simply stopped, not through effort or achievement, but through the recognition that what it was seeking had never been absent, that the very consciousness that was doing the seeking was already the treasure it was trying to find. This recognition brought with it a quality of profound relief and gratitude, as if he had been carrying a heavy burden for decades and had suddenly realized that he could set it down and rest in the natural lightness that was his birthright as a conscious being. The stream continued its gentle flow, the birds continued their evening songs, the wildflowers continued their silent celebration of simply being wildflowers, and Saku sat among it all with a heart finally at rest, no longer seeking anything beyond the immediate gift of being alive and aware in this moment that contained everything necessary for complete fulfillment. He understood now why so many spiritual teachers had pointed toward the present moment as the doorway to liberation, why the Vietnamese master had spoken so often about the importance of stopping and coming home to oneself, why all the great wisdom traditions ultimately pointed toward the recognition that what we seek is what we already are. The valley had become a perfect teacher, not through any words or formal instruction, but simply through its complete presence to itself, its total acceptance of what it was, without any need for improvement or transformation. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky above the valley, Saku felt a deep sense of completion that had nothing to do with finishing a journey, and everything to do with finally understanding that there had never been anywhere to go, nothing to achieve, no spiritual state to attain beyond the simple recognition of what was already present and perfect in every moment of ordinary experience. He had come home not to a place but to himself, not to a state of consciousness but to the consciousness that had always been present, witnessing all states. Not to the end of seeking, but to the understanding that what was being sought had never been absent, and therefore could never be found, because it was the very ground of all seeking and finding. This was the peace that surpassed all understanding, not because it was mysterious or difficult to comprehend, but because it was so simple and immediate that the seeking mind had overlooked it for decades, while looking for something more dramatic and achievement-worthy. Now, dear friend, as you listen to Saku's story of finally coming home to himself in that quiet valley, you might recognize something of your own spiritual journey, your own search for peace and meaning, your own sometimes exhausting efforts to find in external circumstances and achievements the satisfaction and rest that can only be discovered through returning to the present moment awareness that is already fully present, already perfectly complete, already offering everything your heart truly desires. Perhaps you too have experienced the restless energy of seeking something better, something more, something that will finally provide the lasting fulfillment that seems to remain just out of reach, no matter how much you accomplish or acquire or understand. Maybe you've wondered if you're missing something essential, if there's some key insight or practice or experience that would finally bring the peace and contentment that you've been longing for since you first began to question the meaning and purpose of your existence. The beautiful teaching hidden within Saku's discovery is that the home you're seeking is not a destination to be reached, but the very ground from which you've never departed, not a state to be achieved, but the awareness that is already present and witnessing all your efforts to achieve something better. Like the valley that existed in perfect peace, simply by being completely present to its own nature, without any agenda for improvement or transformation, your own deepest being is already at rest, already at peace, already perfectly fulfilled in ways that don't depend on external circumstances or spiritual accomplishments. The present moment awareness from which you're listening to these words right now is the same consciousness that Saku recognized in that hidden valley, the same natural peace that doesn't need to be created or earned, but only recognized and appreciated for what it has always been. This recognition of your own innate completeness doesn't mean that growth and learning and spiritual practice become unnecessary or meaningless, any more than Saku's realization invalidated the value of his 30 years of sincere seeking. Instead, it transforms the entire context of practice from a desperate search for something missing to a grateful celebration of what is already present, from an effort to become something better to an appreciation of what you already are in your most natural and undefended state. When you understand that you're already home, that you've never actually left the peace and wholeness that constitute your essential nature, then every spiritual practice becomes an opportunity to rest more deeply in this recognition, rather than an attempt to achieve some future state of enlightenment or liberation. Take a moment right now to experience what Saku discovered in that quiet valley. Let your attention settle into the immediate reality of this present moment, not as a stepping stone to somewhere else, but as the complete fulfillment of every spiritual aspiration you've ever held. Notice the awareness that is aware of these words, the consciousness that is present to whatever thoughts and feelings and sensations are arising right now. This awareness doesn't come and go, doesn't improve or deteriorate, doesn't need to be fixed or enhanced or purified. It is simply present, already perfectly clear, already completely at peace, already offering the unconditional rest and fulfillment that your heart has been seeking through all its various spiritual adventures and worldly pursuits. Feel how this awareness is like the valley in Saku's story, naturally peaceful, inherently complete, requiring nothing beyond its own simple presence to be perfectly fulfilled. This is your true home, not a place you need to travel to or a state you need to achieve, but the ever-present ground of your being that has been patiently waiting for you to stop seeking long enough to notice what was already here all along. Rest in this recognition for a moment and feel how the restless energy of seeking something better, something more, something that will finally satisfy your deepest longing naturally subsides when you understand that what you've been seeking is what you already are. This is the final teaching that completes our journey together through ancient stories and timeless wisdom, that healing is not something you achieve, but something you recognize, that peace is not a destination, but your natural state, that home is not somewhere you go, but the consciousness from which you've never actually departed, despite all your dreams of spiritual exile and return. Like Saku sitting beside the stream in that perfect valley, you can rest now in the understanding that your search is complete, not because you've found something new, but because you finally stopped looking for what was never missing, never absent, never anywhere other than the simple awareness that is reading these words and recognizing their truth in this very moment. As our 3-hour journey together draws to its gentle close, I want you to know how grateful I am that you chose to spend this precious time exploring these ancient teachings and timeless stories with me here in our Moon Mind Temple community. What we've shared together over these past hours is more than just entertainment or information. It's been a genuine spiritual practice, a form of meditation in listening, a way of nourishing your soul with the kind of wisdom and beauty that can truly transform your relationship to yourself and your world. You've practiced the art of stopping, the skill of flowing with change, the courage of embracing life's small difficulties with grace, and most importantly, the simple recognition that everything you've been seeking through spiritual practice and personal growth is already perfectly present in the awareness that has been witnessing our entire conversation. Through Kenzo's discovery at the mountain pond, you've learned that healing begins with the simple practice of stopping, not stopping your life or your responsibilities, but stopping the endless mental activity that disturbs your natural peace like stones thrown into still water. Through Jiro's experience on the bamboo path, you've discovered that life's small irritations and daily challenges are not obstacles to spiritual growth, but opportunities to develop the flexible strength that allows you to bend with difficulty rather than breaking under as it. Through Ishi's journey down the mountain stream, you've explored the art of flowing with change rather than resisting it, learning to trust the current of life to carry you toward exactly the experiences your soul needs for its complete awakening. Through Akari's transformation as the village lantern keeper, you've seen how any ordinary activity can become a doorway to presence and appreciation when approached with mindful attention, how the conditions for happiness are always available in the simplest moments of daily existence, if you know how to recognize and tend them with care. And through Saku's homecoming in the quiet valley, you've touched the ultimate teaching that underlies all spiritual practice, that what you're seeking is what you already are, that the peace you're longing for is the very awareness that's doing the longing, that home is not a destination, but the consciousness from which you've never actually departed. These are not just beautiful stories from long ago and far away. but practical teachings that you can apply immediately to whatever challenges and opportunities your own life presents. The next time you find yourself caught in mental spinning and emotional reactivity, you can remember Kenzo's pond and practice the art of stopping the mental stones that create unnecessary ripples in the water of your peace. When life's small frustrations threaten to overwhelm your equanimity, you can recall Jiro's bamboo path and practice bending with difficulty rather than rigidly resisting what cannot be changed. When unexpected changes force you to let go of familiar patterns and comfort zones, you can remember Ishi's river journey and practice flowing with the current rather than exhausting yourself by swimming against it. When routine activities begin to feel meaningless or burdensome, you can remember Akari's lantern and practice bringing the light of mindful attention to whatever tasks fill your days, transforming ordinary responsibilities into opportunities for presence and appreciation. And whenever you find yourself caught in the trap of seeking something better, something more, something that will finally provide lasting satisfaction, you can remember Saku's Valley and return to the recognition that everything you're seeking is already perfectly present in this moment, in this awareness, in this consciousness that needs nothing beyond its own natural clarity and peace. But perhaps most importantly, you can remember that you're not walking this path of awakening alone, that you're part of a vast invisible community of people around the world who have also chosen to prioritize wisdom over worry, presence over productivity, inner peace over external achievements. Right now, in this very moment, there are thousands of people in dozens of countries who are also seeking to live with greater mindfulness, greater compassion, greater appreciation for the simple gifts that each day offers. Some of them are listening to these same words, some are engaged in their own forms of spiritual practice, some are simply trying to bring a little more kindness and awareness to their interactions with family, friends, and colleagues. But all of them are part of the same global community of awakening that you joined the moment you chose to spend your precious time and attention on teachings that nourish the soul rather than content that feeds anxiety, distraction. If it feels right to you, I invite you to take a moment to connect with this worldwide community of fellow practitioners by sharing in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. There's something magical about knowing that as you rest in the peace of these teachings, someone else might be waking up to a new day in Tokyo. Someone else might be taking their lunch break in London. Someone else might be settling in for sleep in New York. All of us connected by our shared intention to live with greater wisdom and compassion. This is the modern expression of what Thich Nhat Hanh called the Sangha, not just the formal community of monks and nuns in monasteries, but the worldwide family of all beings who are committed to the path of mindful living and loving awareness. Wherever you are right now, whether you're lying in bed hoping for peaceful sleep, sitting in a comfortable chair during a quiet evening, taking a walking break from work responsibilities, or finding a few moments of calm in the midst of a busy day, please know that you're surrounded by the invisible but very real support of everyone who has ever chosen healing over hurting, presence over distraction, love over fear. You're part of our Moonmind Temple family, connected to all of us who believe that ancient wisdom can provide practical guidance for modern challenges, that stories and teachings from spiritual traditions can offer genuine refuge from the anxiety and overwhelm that characterizes so much of contemporary life. As you prepare to transition from this listening experience back into whatever activities fill the rest of your day or evening, I encourage you to carry with you the most essential teaching from our time together, that healing is possible in every moment, with every breath, through every choice to stop disturbing your natural peace and rest, instead in the awareness that has been present throughout our entire conversation. You don't need perfect circumstances or advanced spiritual abilities to access this peace. You only need the willingness to pause, to breathe, to remember that beneath whatever difficulties or challenges you may be facing, there is always this deeper stillness, waiting to support and nourish you. If you're preparing for sleep, let yourself rest now, in the confidence that you've spent these hours feeding your mind and heart with wisdom rather than worry, beauty rather than anxiety, timeless truths rather than temporary distractions. Let your body settle completely into whatever surface is supporting you, feeling how perfectly you're held by the earth's gravity and the furniture's stability without any effort on your part. Allow your breathing to slow and deepen naturally as your nervous system recognizes that this is a time for rest and restoration, for integration and healing, for allowing all the insights and inspiration from our shared journey to settle into the quiet depths of your being, where they can continue to nourish and guide you even while you sleep. If you're continuing with your day, take with you the reminder that every step can be a meditation, every breath can be a prayer, every moment of stopping to appreciate something beautiful or meaningful can be a doorway back to the peace that is your natural inheritance as a conscious being. Remember that you have a choice in every moment to add more mental stones to the pond of your consciousness, or to let its natural clarity emerge, to resist life's inevitable changes, or to flow gracefully with whatever current you find yourself in, to focus on what's missing from your experience, or to appreciate what's already present and perfect just as it is. The Buddha once taught his followers that peace comes from within and cannot be shaken by external circumstances. Tonight, you've touched this peace that the Buddha spoke of, not as a philosophical concept, but as a living reality that you can access whenever you remember to stop seeking it somewhere else and recognize it as the very ground of your own awareness. This peace is not something you achieved through listening to these stories. It's something you recognized as what you've always been, beneath all the mental activity and emotional reactivity that sometimes obscures your natural clarity and contentment. As I prepare to say goodbye for now, I want you to know that this is not really an ending, but rather a beginning, the beginning of a deeper relationship with the wisdom and peace that you've touched during our time together. These teachings will continue to work in your consciousness, like seeds planted in fertile soil, sprouting into insights and transformations that may surprise you in the days and weeks ahead. The stories we've shared will remain available to you as sources of guidance and inspiration whenever you need reminders of your own capacity for healing, growth, and awakening to the extraordinary gifts hidden within ordinary experience. I hope you'll return to visit us again soon here at Moonlight Temple, where there are always new stories to discover, new teachings to explore, new opportunities to rest in the ancient wisdom that has been guiding seekers toward peace and liberation for thousands of years. Until then, may you walk gently through your days, breathe consciously through your challenges, and remember always that you carry within yourself the same perfect peace that Sakhu discovered in his quiet valley, not as something to be achieved, but as what you already are, not as a destination to be reached, but as the consciousness from which you've never departed, not as a future possibility, but as the ever-present reality of this moment, this awareness, this home that needs no improvement, because it is already complete, beyond all seeking and finding. Rest well, dear friend. Sleep peacefully, and know that wherever you are, whatever challenges you may face, whatever joys you may discover, you are always welcome here, in our community of hearts committed to the path of awakening, always surrounded by the love and support of fellow travelers who understand that the most important journey is not through external landscapes, but into the infinite spaciousness of your own true nature, where perfect peace has been waiting patiently for your return since the very beginning of time. Until we meet again in the silence between words, in the space between breaths, in the eternal present moment that connects all beings in one seamless web of consciousness and compassion, may you be at peace, may you be happy, may you be free from suffering, and may you always remember that healing is possible in every moment, with every breath, through every choice, to come home to the awareness that you've never actually left. Good night, and thank you for sharing this sacred time with all of us here at Moonmind Temple.